Hello everyone, Lytro Storm here, and today we're going to be diving into another Walking Dead What If. Up until now I've been covering the Telltale games, however this will be the first one on the show that I'm doing. I've been rewatching the show and writing down tons of ideas for what ifs, and this has been my favorite one so far, so spoiler warning, go watch the show, it's really great, just watch it before you do this. But anyway, what if Dale survived? The reason I chose this one to start with is because Dale is one of my favorite characters, and I just think it would be very interesting to see him live in the group after Season 2. But before we start, I want to remind you guys to like the video and subscribe if you end up enjoying this. And if you want to see more AMC Walking Dead What Ifs, please let me know, but try not to suggest anything after Season 6, because that's kind of where I'm at right now. As always, be sure to join my Discord and follow me on Twitter. Links in the description. So for starters, if you've seen the show, you might think of an easy change that would keep him alive. Carl shoots the walker in the woods instead of throwing rocks at it. However, that would not be the only change that we have to make. Skipping ahead to the finale where Shane has been killed and the walkers are overrunning the farm, Beth's boyfriend Jimmy got in the RV and drove it to the barn to go save Rick and Carl. However, if Dale's alive, seeing that it's his RV and he's the one who drives it most of the time, he would go do that, so we have to say that he doesn't somehow. And here's the way I would fix that. Dale would be going to drive the RV to the barn, but that is when he sees Andrea in the front line, shooting a bunch of walkers that are growing increasingly closer. To Dale, Andrea has been the most important person to him, and so he has to try and help her. Because of this, he tells Jimmy to drive the RV instead, which gets him killed like in canon. Dale would help Andrea, and the two would then move on. They see Herschel alone fighting, and also see Carol running around, just getting chased. Andrea would tell Dale to go help Herschel, but he would not want to leave her. She would then respond that he has to respect her choice this time, because remember that he forced her not to kill herself at the CDC. Andrea would say that she would be fine, and so Dale would ultimately be forced to trust her, leading to him helping Rick to save Herschel. The three would then get into the vehicle with Carl and drive off, with Andrea saving Carol and getting left behind like in the show. After all of that, everyone would regroup. Rick would reveal that everyone turns if their brain isn't destroyed, and everyone in the group would be mad at him for not telling them. Dale would then step in and say that while he does think Rick should have told them sooner, it ultimately didn't get any of them killed. Plus, Rick has been there to help them so many times. They can't just gear up and leave because of one mistake. He deserves a second chance. Herschel would then step up and say that he agrees, to which Daryl would also follow since he trusted Rick in the show. Nighttime would then set upon our group, and Rick would admit to everyone that he had to kill Shane. They would take it in the same way they did as in canon, but after Rick explains that it's self-defense, Dale once again stands up for him. He tells everyone that Shane basically almost admitted to leaving Otis behind and that he lied about his death. He didn't outright say it, but when Dale confronted him about it, he didn't deny it and only used it to threaten him. Shane was dangerous and Rick only defended himself. This, once again, is not a good reason to just throw him out. Dale would then continue saying that he felt guilty personally. He let Jimmy take the RV so that he could help Andrea, and Jimmy died because of it. He trusted Andrea with her decision, and now she's left behind and they have no clue if she's alive. They lost 4 members of that group in just one night, so now more than ever, they need to stick together. Once again, Daryl and Herschel would agree. And this would lead into the Rick-tatorship not happening. Instead, Rick would make it clear that he messed up, but if they're going to put him into the leader position, throwing everything onto him when things go wrong has to stop. And that would then end Season 2 with a lot less of the group doubting Rick at this point. With 3 people to back him up, this leads to the group having less animosity between them as the 8 months pass. So Season 3 would begin, and the group would find their way to the prison, and all of that would go the same. However, what would be interesting would be that Dale would be helping kill the walkers. It would be very different to see him actually on the front lines fighting against them, since he is usually one to stay out of that stuff. Like, I'm sure he killed some in the show, and I'm just not remembering, but I literally cannot think of a single scene where he kills walkers, and definitely not one where he's up close and personal. At the end of the episode, Herschel gets bitten in the show, while Dale is actually the one to be bitten in the comics. So I thought that maybe having Dale be bitten and getting his leg cut off might be cool, and also a nod to the comics. However, I ultimately think that the story would be more interesting if Dale keeps his leg, since we're following the show continuity. So we won't change anything, and we'll say Herschel will still be bitten and get his leg cut off, as the group meets the prisoners. The next episode would begin, and they would get Herschel to safety and continue clearing the walkers out with the prisoners. Big Tiny would never be bitten though, since Dale would be there to cover the rear. This means Tomas wouldn't kill Big Tiny so suddenly, leading to less suspicion about him. However, the suspicion would begin again when he throws the walker at Rick like in canon. After that, Rick would want to kill him, however Dale would convince him not to, and they would instead disarm and restrain him. Rick then forces him outside of the prison, and Andrew would see this and chase after him, leading to them both getting locked out. Herschel would then survive due to Laurie's help, and we would move into episode 3. This episode would stay exactly the same, since it doesn't feature the prison group at all, and is entirely focused on Andrea, Michonne, and the governor. The next episode would be sparked by the alarms going off like in the show, and the walkers would start pouring in. This would lead to T-Dog's sacrifice for Carol, and Rick, Daryl, Oscar, and Big Tiny to all go to the power room. As they arrive in there, that's when Tomas would jump Rick with a hammer, and Andrew would be using his fists to fight. However, Big Tiny would fend off Andrew, not wanting to hurt him, and also not wanting him to fight Rick. Eventually, Rick would lose his gun, and Oscar would aim it at the 4 of them. He would shoot Tomas, and Andrew would try to run before being shot as well. Oscar then hands the gun to Rick like in canon, symbolizing that the remaining prisoners are on their side. Unfortunately though, Laurie still gave birth to Judith, and Carl put her down, leaving Rick broken. Everything in the next couple of episodes would go the same, with Rick grieving and getting fake phone calls, as well as Andrea and the governor's relationship evolving. Michonne would also be hunted down, and Merle would kidnap Glenn and Maggie. Dale would also have a scene similar to Herschel's where he tries to help Rick and tries to make him not let himself go, as the group really does need him. Michonne would eventually end up at the prison, and like in canon, they would find Carol. All of the Glenn and Maggie torture from the governor and Merle also goes the same. Rick would take the same group he took in canon to go to Woodbury to free them, however this time Big Tiny would be added. They do manage to save Glenn and Maggie, but Daryl ends up staying behind. Michonne then kills Penny's walker and cuts the governor's eye, and also Merle and Daryl would be forced to fight to the death but would escape, leading to Oscar getting shot and killed. The remainder of the group then disagrees about Merle, once again like in canon, leading to Daryl staying with him for a while. Carl would help Tyrese, Sasha, Alan, and Ben, which would lead to them trying to stay at the prison, but Rick wouldn't want this because he isn't trusting people right now. However, Dale would stick with the rest of the group and agree that they need to trust people more, especially now that they've lost multiple people in the last few days. Plus, they can't just leave these people on the road like they were before. They know what it's like to be that way, but Rick begins to see Laurie in his hallucinations, and that basically forces Tyrese and his group out. Episode 10 would go the same, Rick's out of it, Glenn is going crazy, Axel gets killed, and Daryl and Merle come to save Rick from the governor. Everyone would argue about Merle and whether they should stay at the prison, but that is when Andrea returns. She would show up, and Dale would see her. They would reunite, hugging and crying with each other. And I think that Andrea, knowing Dale is alive, would kinda lean her more towards the group than in canon. She wants to help Woodbury, but finding out about Dale still being alive and the governor sending Merle to kill Michonne makes her realize that she has to stop all of this before it ends up in more bloodshed than there needs to be. Dale would understand that she's trying to maintain peace between two civilizations, and so he would respect her decision. She then leaves, heading back to Woodbury. Alright, so this part would begin on the episode where Rick, Carl, and Michonne meet Morgan. However, I don't think they would leave the hitchhiker guy behind. This is because with Dale in the group, their humanity is a little bit higher. He would join them in the car, but they would disarm him to make sure he doesn't do anything. We don't really know anything about the guy other than that he was scared and desperately wanted to be helped. So I think with that, we can at least assume he'd be decently nice. I don't think he would try anything on the group and would instead just respect that he's been given the opportunity to live. This episode would basically go the same though, with them leaving Morgan and heading back to the prison. Rick and the governor would then take a seat together and negotiate things, but Dale would also come along so that way he could see Andrea again. Dale and Herschel would bond with Andrea and Milton, like in canon, only this time, Dale's there. Unlike in the original, Rick would tell both Herschel and Dale that Michonne is what the governor wants, and that would go basically how you'd expect. Andrea then heads out of Woodbury wanting to go to the prison, and the governor then hunts her down like in canon. She escapes, but she is caught by the governor before she makes it to the prison. However, Dale would be on watch instead of Rick, and would see her fall to the ground. He wouldn't know what it was, but he knew that he had to check it out. He opened the gate and ran toward the site, but by that point, whatever it was gone. He knows that there had to be something. He wasn't seeing things, but he didn't really know if it would be important. He heads back inside and tells the group, but they're convinced that it couldn't have been much. After a while, the group would finally agree to not give Michonne up, after Merle takes Michonne out to the governor. He ultimately lets Michonne go, and kills a ton of the governor's men before getting killed himself. Daryl finds him and puts him down, and goes back to the prison. The finale of Season 3 would then come with Milton burning all the walkers the governor planned to use and getting locked in the room with Andrea. The governor stabs him and leaves him to turn, while then going back to the prison to make an attack. However, the group pretends to leave and then makes their surprise attack like in the original, leading to the governor gunning down all of his own soldiers. One survives and tells Rick what happened. The group would then return to Woodbury to save Andrea, and that's where we'd find her bitten. Both Dale and Michonne would be broken by this. They didn't get to have the reunion that they wanted. Andrea, the person that meant the most to them, was now going to die. Rick gave her the gun, and she looked up at Dale. He looked back, and she asked if he was going to volunteer to do it. Dale responds that it was her choice. He couldn't pick for her. She would smile, and the rest of the group would then step out. Michonne and Dale stayed in the room as the gunshot fired. So yeah, the whole character arc with Dale realizing that Andrea has to make her own choice has now finally finished with Andrea's death. After this, the group would gather everyone from Woodbury and would take them back to the prison as their new home, and that would then end Season 3. Season 4 would begin, and we would see Dale talking to Carol as well as all the new people who just came to the prison. It seems as though he has kept his composure and gotten over what happened to Andrea 2 months prior. He would be taking watch duty in one of the towers, and Herschel would ask him if he wanted to come down and help with the gardening. Dale would decline, saying that he was all good, and Herschel responds that he can't be on watch forever. When the prison virus starts to spread, Dale would be informed of it, once again being in his tower. He isn't necessarily driving the others away, but when there's an opportunity for someone to stand watch, of course Dale would take it up. He needs to get his mind off of Andrea. Plus, he was the guy who always did that in Seasons 1 and 2 anyway, just with the RV, and rest in peace RV. Tyrese would find out about Karen and David's murder, and would then fight Rick. Rick would be beating him down, and Dale would be standing behind him. He looks at him in shock at what he's done, and asks where Herschel is. Herschel is, of course, looking for berries and stuff to help with the virus. He later finds out that Glenn is sick, and decides to begin helping the people who have it. Dale, seeing Herschel do this, walks up to him and asks him if he needs any help. Herschel would tell them that he doesn't have to do this, but Dale would say that this is his calling since Andrea died. This is the first thing that he can truly contribute to and care about fully. He wants to help these people. She stayed at Woodbury to prevent deaths, so he can't just let the people she died for be next. Herschel would accept this, and the two would work together to try and solve the virus problem. Michonne, Daryl, Bob, and Tyrese would go on the med run, Rick would exile Carol, and the next episode would see Herschel being helped by Dale. Glenn and Sasha wouldn't have to push themselves as much, and who knows, with the extra help, more people might have lived. Rick and Carl then kill all the walkers that breached the fence, and the medicine makes it to the prison, saving the remaining people. All of the governor's stuff would be going the same, where he meets Tara and Lily, and all that happens, he regains his army, and Dale would just be walking up to his watch post. He sat down looking at the walkers and thinking about Andrea, Amy, everything that had happened at the prison. He knew that he had finally found his calling once again, and was ready to leave everything behind. His calling was not only to this group, but the people who came from Woodbury. The children, the adults, the elderly, the survivors of the virus. He needed to be there for them, and he needed to be there for his family that had been here the whole time. He decided to take one last look out onto the prison before stopping his constant watch duty. He sees Herschel and Michonne and smiles, walking back inside. He left just seconds before the governor arrived and kidnapped both of them. The next episode, the governor would gear up for the hostage situation, and all the negotiation would go the same. But in the end, even though Rick impresses both Herschel and Dale by trying to solve things peacefully, the governor still kills Herschel. They then go to war, and everything that happens in canon still happens. This time though, since Big Tiny is still alive, he would die during the war, as well as the hitchhiker guy, and any other survivors from the virus. However, I think that instead of Michonne stabbing the governor, it would be Dale who shoots him in the side. For the first time ever, Dale shoots a man. Not a walker, but a person. This wasn't an act of revenge. He had to save not only Rick, but his people, and his home. This would throw the governor off, but he would try to attack again, to which Michonne would then stab him like originally. We're just kind of inserting a little moment for Dale. Rick then finds Carl, and all that goes the same, with Lily shooting the governor. Alright, so after the attack from the governor, the survivors would be split apart. Dale climbed down from his watchtower and began running around. He searched for anyone he could find, but didn't manage to have any luck until he saw Glenn. He told him to run inside, and the two got into the prison. There, Dale would tell Glenn what happened, and that the governor killed Herschel. Glenn was upset by this, but he said that they had to go find the bus as it had Maggie and the Woodbury survivors in it. And so now the two would gear up, getting guns and the riot armor. In the original, we don't see Glenn actually grabbing the armor, so we don't know if there were two. However, there were two walkers who had the riot armor, so it is possible that there would still be another there. And if there wasn't, then I'd just say that in his free time, Dale would clean the other one up. That way, there would be an extra even if there wasn't in the original version. So the two would put the riot armor on and would run through the walkers, which is when Dale would see Tara sitting. He would take her gun, seeing that she hasn't fired a single shot, and would tell her to come with them. Tara was confused as to why he would want to do that, as she came here to try and take their home. However, Dale would say that she obviously didn't go through it, so she must be a good person, even if she doesn't believe it now. Glenn would say that they have to make it out alive so that way they can find their people, and she's gonna help. She would reluctantly agree, and they would do the whole Molotov plan. That would be enough to distract the walkers, allowing for Dale and Tara to cover Glenn as they escape. Once outside of the prison, they would talk about how Glenn was trying to find his wife, and Tara would go over how awful she feels. Dale would remind her that to him, she's already made up for it by helping them, and she has to stop guilting herself. A couple walkers would pull up, which they would deal with, before Glenn begins to pass out, just as Abraham, Rosita, and Eugene show up. They would pick them up like they did originally, and during the drive, Dale would see the bus with everyone dead around it. He would ask them to pull over, but they wouldn't listen, and so he would just continue on, now knowing that almost everyone from Woodbury was dead. Tara then asked him if he had the same duty to those people as she feels she has to them, and he would say yes. He would then ask himself how he's going to tell Glenn, and we'd transition out of the scene. Eventually, Glenn would wake up once more and would hear from Dale that they passed the bus, but he didn't see Maggie. Glenn would begin freaking out, yelling and beating on the window, causing Abraham to stop the truck. They'd step out, where the same discourse would happen, although Dale would tell Glenn that they were going to make a cure. He would say that that was great and all, but he needed to go find his wife. However, Dale wouldn't just let him split off from them. He would prevent Glenn from attacking Abraham, and Eugene would then botch their ride, so they'd have to go on foot, following Glenn for a while. One small change is that instead of Glenn, Dale would offer his armor to Eugene in exchange for them to keep walking, and so they would continue. Once they make it to the tunnel, is where things would start to change. You see, Dale knows that it's not the smart thing to do, and Tara has more respect for Dale than Glenn, although she does respect both of them. Together, they would be able to convince Glenn to go around, and so they would do so until they eventually catch up with Maggie, Sasha, and Bob, which would go about the same. During the reunion, Dale would be sitting on his own, and Tara would sit beside him. She'd tell him that it was okay, and that he didn't have to feel responsible. It wasn't his fault, and he tried his best to find them. Plus, if all the other people from the prison survived, who knows how many others did. Dale would smile at her, and would say that maybe she's right. The old man thanks Tara, and they would then join the rest of the group in celebration. Glenn would also apologize to Dale for acting irrationally during all the arguments, and would thank him for being there for him. This then completes Dale's small responsibility arc for the people of Woodbury, as now Dale has accepted that he did all he could, and he must keep living on and be happy for Glenn right now. After this, the group would roll up to Terminus, and the others would arrive shortly. They'd all get locked up until Carol saves them like originally, and then they'd get up out of there. Dale would try to free some other people, who just end up getting eaten by walkers anyway. Now this would make him sad, but they'd have to move on. The group would now reunite with Carol, Tyrese, and Judith, which would make them all very happy. They all continue to walk, and when they stop, I think Tyrese would tell Dale about what happened with Lizzie and Mika. This is because he knows that Dale is someone he can confide in, and someone who knows his morals, so he could tell them if they made the right call. However, upon hearing that Lizzie killed her own little sister just to prove that the walkers were alive, Dale is honestly horrified. This would be the first time ever where he has no idea what he would have done in that scenario. The idea that a little girl had taken her own sister's life was just gut-wrenching to him. And then that girl being shot? Maybe they could have kept her. No, she was gonna go for Judith next. What about leaving her? She was playing with walkers, plus she's a kid, so she wouldn't last out there. But was killing her really the best option? He honestly had no idea. He apologized to Tyrese before getting up and walking away to think, and that's when they'd hear Gabriel calling for help. Of course, Dale would be the first to charge in, and the group would follow shortly after. Gabriel would lead them to his church, and then they'd go to the food bank while Dale stayed behind to think and protect the group. Unfortunately, Bob still gets bitten here due to Gabriel messing up, and later that night would be taken by Gareth and his people to get his leg eaten. At the same time, Carol and Daryl would find the same car that took Beth, and so they'd chase it down. Bob would then get tossed back to the church, where they would prep for the return of Gareth. Dale would be telling Rick and the others not to go overboard, and they'd say okay. The time would come, and Rick would have everyone hide, leading to Gareth getting his fingers shot off, as well as a few of his dudes already being shot. Everyone that remains would be disarmed and forced to kneel, with Gareth telling him why they did it, and swearing that they'd never cross paths again. Rick would be just about to fulfill his promise by killing Gareth with the red-handled knife. However, Dale would tell him to wait. He says that if they want to be let go, they need to make sure that they would never cannibalize anyone else, not just them. Gareth would promise, and Rick would say that they're not letting him go. However, Dale responds that they need to draw some sort of line here. Sure, what they did is unforgivable, but it's what they thought they had to do, just like they think they have to kill them. It's not the same, he knows, but killing people who are begging is not okay. Tara would be the first to back him up, then Glenn, Tyrese, Maggie, and just about everyone. The reason I think that they would do this is because you can tell in that scene that they weren't okay with what was going on here. Rick would ultimately accept this, knowing that it was a group decision, and this would make Sasha angry. Rick would tell her to calm down and that it's okay, but she'd yell that this wasn't okay before killing the person she did originally. She'd go after the next one, but Tyrese would stop her. Sasha would be trying to fight him off, but she really isn't as strong as him, and so she would ultimately be convinced to stop. Dale and Rick would go outside to let the others go, with Dale making sure Gareth remembers his promise. Rick would also follow with his own statement, saying that if they saw them again, they'd lose a lot more than fingers. He'd then leave them outside, a good distance away from the church, and after this, Abraham would want to leave, and Glenn, Maggie, and Tara would be decided on as tribute for them to wait for Carol and Daryl. Of course, they wouldn't show up in time, and so Abraham and his group would leave with Glenn, Maggie, and Tara. That same night, Daryl would show up with Noah, who would be the perfect lead on Beth's location. The group would then head out to go get her, and Dale would want to go since he wanted to help save Herschel's daughter. I mean, Herschel was one of the people that he respected the most before his death. However, one problem was that Sasha was going, and Rick thought it would be best if Dale didn't come, since she was furious at him for letting Gareth live. Plus, he wanted him there to protect Carl and Judith. Dale would take a look back at Gabriel, who was still shaken by everything that happened, and he would decide that it would be best for him to stay. After everyone else leaves, he tries to talk to Gabriel, but the man said that he just wants to go into his room, and so he would let him. He would then sneak out through the floorboards, and Dale would know this because he went to check on him. The old man would tell Michonne and Carl that he was going out to find him, and so they would stay on their guard. When Gabriel arrives at the school and finds Bob's leg, he still gets infuriated and starts throwing stuff around. Dale watches this and tells him that he won't get anywhere with that. The world is an awful place now and they have to accept it, but they don't have to become awful with it. He would say that he used to be similar to Gabriel, not wanting to fight, but he knew that it was the only way to survive. There's a way to keep your humanity and still live in this world, but praying to God won't solve everything. Gabriel would start to get upset, but would calm down and understand what the man was saying. Walkers would then start pulling up, and so they'd have to run back to the church. Once there, they'd find a few more walkers, and Dale would use his rifle to kill a few. The walkers would be getting way too close, and so he'd toss the rifle and use a melee weapon. He manages to hold back a walker as another one comes at him. That one is then shot by Carl, and Dale manages to hold the other walker off long enough to stab it with a screwdriver or whatever melee weapon he has. Now this is a far cry from the original Dale, who got overpowered by a single walker. Yeah, while he was off guard, he still wasn't even able to escape or push it off temporarily. He just got killed by it. However, this Dale is far stronger and more experienced due to him fighting up close all the time. Anyway, he grabs his rifle and they would get inside, with Abraham and the others showing up afterward. They then all come to find out that Beth was killed, and so that would be kinda sad. The group would split, with Rick, Glenn, Michonne, Tyrese, and Dale going with Noah to see if the old community is still alive. Turns out, it's not, and so they check for supplies instead. The difference here is that Dale is there, so he'd want to stick with Noah, as the whole reason he went was to try and help Noah. He couldn't really save Herschel, and couldn't try to save his daughter, so the closest thing he can get to doing that for either of them is to help her friend. While Tyrese is looking at pictures and Noah is somewhere else in his house, Dale would find Noah's twin brothers as walkers. This would be a shocking sight to him, as it was two kids. They hadn't really seen too many kid walkers before, so he would be caught a bit off guard. However, he would keep his composure, yelling for help and stabbing the first one. Tyrese and Noah would then show up as the other one attacked Dale, and Tyrese would use his hammer to kill it. Dale apologizes for causing such a scene, as he didn't expect to see such an awful thing. He also apologized to Noah since the two kids were his brothers. Luckily though, in case you didn't notice, Tyrese lives. And so the group continues walking back to the others, and the next episode would begin. The whole group is just walking that whole episode, with Sasha being super emotional, but she wouldn't be since Tyrese is alive. When the pack of dogs attacks and Sasha kills them, I think Dale would have a look on his face like, oh, I know what's about to happen and I don't like it, and then it cuts to them eating the dogs. The group would then push through to the barn, where they would have to hold back some walkers during the storm. But following into the next day, Sasha and Maggie went out and found Aaron, and that whole thing with Rick being paranoid would still occur, so once everyone else leaves, Dale would stay in the barn with Rick, Judith, and Aaron instead. Rick would be trying to force Aaron to eat the applesauce to make sure it isn't poisoned, and Aaron would say that he hates applesauce, so instead of letting him be forced to eat it, Dale would, since he basically could tell this person wasn't a bad guy. Rick would then feed it to Judith, and the rest of the group would return later. When Rick goes against what Aaron says about taking the safe road, Dale would tell him that it's not a smart idea. Everyone else agrees with him, and Rick would say that if anything happens, it would be on him. Luckily though, this means Dale gets to drive the new RV, so let's go! Some bad stuff does happen like in the original, but they make it out of there and meet up with Eric. The next morning, they arrive at Alexandria and do their interviews, with Dale's interview being very calm as he explains the awful things that have happened to the group, but that they were all still good people. One thing he says is that Rick has lost his way, and he thought this place would be best for him, as he needed to feel safe for once. Afterward, everyone would get jobs, with Dale offering to be a lookout at the watch posts, since that's what he's always been good at. However, Deanna would suggest that he be her advisor, as she could tell he had a strong moral compass and was a very passionate person. This offer would actually touch Dale's heart deeply, as he felt like his new ideology was going to make new waves, and so of course he would accept. Tyrese would be someone who goes on runs along with Tara, Noah, and Glenn, and when Aiden nearly gets Tara killed by trying to mess with a walker, Glenn would kill it, and they'd return to Alexandria. There, Tyrese would try to prevent the fight between Aiden and Glenn, and he would be the one to stop Nicholas from jumping Glenn instead of Daryl going crazy on him. Sasha wouldn't be doing her whole target practice thing and would instead just be chosen as a lookout, and I feel like Deanna's husband Reg and Dale would get along very well. This is because they're both older men trying to live life the best way they possibly can, and also trying to make a better life for all of their groups. I think Tyrese and Dale would be there to help Noah get into the party rather than Glenn and Maggie, since Noah has more of a bond with them so far. Another good thing to note is that Sasha wouldn't try to be on watch duty at night, and instead would have been convinced by Tyrese to go to the party. During which, Carol would still try to steal the guns, but I think Dale would notice her leaving and would follow closely behind. When he catches her grabbing the guns, he makes his presence known by clearing his throat, and Carol looks behind her to see him. Dale tells Carol that he understands what she's doing, but that probably isn't the best thing to do. She responds that this is the safest way, and would bring up how he hid the guns from Shane before at the farm. Dale asks if Rick was in on it too, and she wouldn't answer, but that would make it obvious. He follows, telling her that this wasn't the right thing to do for Rick, since he needed to get used to living easier and trusting other people. If he doesn't, they're gonna have another Lori situation on their hands. After Dale says that, that's when Sam walks in, asking what's going on. Seeing her opportunity, Carol just grabs a couple guns and runs off. Dale would call for her, but it wouldn't be of use, she'd already be gone. Sam would then ask the old man if he was gonna tell on her, and he would say that he isn't sure. He's gonna have to talk to her first. The boy asks if she's a good person, and Dale would say yes, but that she just isn't used to living like this anymore. As Dale plans to leave with the boy, he asks how long they've been outside the walls, and Dale would say that it feels like it's been a very long time. Following this, Sam would question how he's able to live both inside and outside the walls so well, and Dale would say that you have to find the balance between being brave and ready to fight, and knowing when to relax. The boy takes this to heart, and Dale would tell him to come on while smiling. This interaction will significantly change Sam going forward in the series, as he isn't going to be threatened or traumatized by Carol. When Sasha has her big outburst, I think Tyrese would be there to try to talk to her afterward. And when Carol, Daryl, and Rick meet up outside the walls, Carol would tell him about what happened with Dale. Dale showing up only made her able to get a few guns, and I think that would coincide with Daryl asking if they really need them. He had been growing much more fond of this place due to his time with Aaron, and so he was more willing to put trust into it. and would even consider Dale to be right. Now the last scene of this episode would actually be pretty cool because it would show a direct parallel to another scene in the show. When Rick looks at Jesse and Pete and hovers his hand over his gun, he would turn around to see Dale standing there. The scene that this would be in reference to would be the one where Shane aims his gun at Rick in season 1 and Dale sees him. Rick would do a similar thing to what Shane did, kinda smiling at Dale and walking away, while Dale looks on in shock. In the next episode, Tyrese would be going on the run along with Glenn, Noah, Tara, Eugene, Nicholas, and Aiden, since there's enough room in the back. Aiden would still end up shooting a grenade on a walker, which would lead to him being stuck on a spike while more walkers pull up, and Tara would be unconscious. Seeing this, Eugene would try to protect her like originally, and going back to Alexandria, Carol would be threatening Sam to try and get her more chocolate, as he wanted her to make more cookies. Nicholas wouldn't be forced to help Glenn save Aiden since Tyrese was there and willing to do it. During this, Aiden would admit that they had left their crew behind and that they were cowards, and so he would ask to be left behind himself. And so, this time, Glenn, Noah, and Tyrese would get caught in the rotating doors with Nicholas. Going back to Sam and Alexandria again, and Dale would see him trying to steal the chocolate. The old man would tell the boy that he must grow into a good man, and that doesn't involve stealing cookies. Because with great power comes... wait, no. Just because he can steal cookies doesn't mean he should. Sam would accept this and would ask Dale to teach him more things, to which Dale would be humbled. Going back to the situation at hand, Tyrese would be the one holding himself against the glass instead of Noah. So when Nicholas runs out, being the coward that he is, it leads to Tyrese instead being taken by the walkers. This does save Noah, but now he and Glenn have to witness this happen to Tyrese, who was just there to help people. After they managed to escape, Glenn would grab Nicholas and box him up, with Noah following behind him, clearly traumatized. He had grown a nice bond with Tyrese, so this brutal death in front of his face would be awful. Following the beatdown, they'd head back home, and Carol would never find out about Pete beating Jesse. Instead, Dale would learn about this. He's a very perceptive guy, since he managed to figure out Shane killed Otis with barely anything leading to that conclusion other than the way Shane carried himself. Gabriel then rats out the group to Deanna, saying that they were bad people, only for Maggie to hear this. Now, with the whole Pete situation, Dale would make sure not to go to Rick, since he knows exactly what will happen if Rick finds out. With Sasha, she would now be coping with Tyrese's death, putting her in a similar mental state to the original. And with Aiden's death and both Gabriel and Nicholas telling her these awful things, Deanna begins to doubt the group like she does in the original show. However, one good thing is that now Noah is an extra witness to what truly happened. Dale goes to Diana about what happened with Pete and would be shocked to find that she knew and just hoped it would get better. He would suggest separating him from Jesse, but Deanna would question what would happen if he didn't want to do that. Dale wouldn't suggest killing, but he would say that there's more than enough people to prevent anyone from hurting anyone here. He manages to convince her, and she asks them to wait a bit longer to get this done, since she's not in a good mental state right now. Dale accepts this, and they would move on. Dale would try to talk to Jesse, and it would be much more civil. The old man would basically tell her that waiting for it to fix itself and trying to justify it is exactly what happens with victims like her. He says that he told Deanna and that they were going to try and separate them. Jesse wouldn't like this and would walk away, but Dale would head to the front of the house to tell her that Sam had asked for a gun to protect her. He basically has the same reasoning as Rick originally, and when Pete shows up, he threatens Dale, and Jesse stands up for him. Rick would be walking by the street when this is happening, and that's when the fight would begin. Pete lands a punch on Dale in the face, and Rick would charge into the house to solve the problem. This fight would go about the same, with Rick choking Pete on the ground. He pushes his son away though, and Deanna manages to call it off, leading to Rick pulling his gun. He begins explaining the new rules to everyone, and Michonne would then one-tap that man, so we'd open up the season finale with Morgan just chilling in the woods. He'd get approached by the wolf guy, and once their fight begins, 3 other dudes pull up. The first would just be some random wolf, but the other 2 would be Gareth and Martin. If you don't remember them, Gareth is the leader of the Terminus guys, and Martin is the guy who tried to kill Tyrese and Judith. He's also part of the Terminus group. Since they weren't killed in this timeline, I think that they would have joined the wolves. However, we see Morgan being able to take on 5 wolves in season 6, so I think he could handle these 4 pretty easily. Once he's knocked out the first 2 dudes, Gareth and Martin would be the only ones left, and Morgan would easily bop them too. Gareth wouldn't be unconscious though, and would actually beg to be left alive since he expected to be killed. Morgan tells him that he isn't going to kill him, and Gareth is surprised at how he's been spared 2 times now, the first by Dale, and the second time by Morgan now. A walker would start pulling up and Morgan would take it down with Gareth not attacking. The man says that he doesn't really want to be part of the wolves, and so Morgan asks if his back is tired. It then cuts to the two lifting up the unconscious bodies and putting them into the car. Once that's done, Morgan would ask how Gareth lost his fingers, and he would say that he crossed the wrong people who exposed him for doing the wrong thing. But an old man from their group saved his life, and he knew that he had to stop doing what he was doing. Morgan questions why he would join the wolves then, and Gareth would say that he was just rolling around with whoever he could to stay alive. The rest of his crew died after, so it was just him and Martin. Morgan asks if Martin feels the same, and Gareth would say no. This makes sense considering how he was willing to kill a baby and a man who offered peace, as well as him not immediately kneeling when threatened by Rick. Gareth says that he wants to be redeemed, and so Morgan agrees to help him. The two now walk off with Morgan not trusting him that much, but it's enough faith that someone like Morgan would give. We transition into Rick waking up, with Michonne confronting him. Rick would talk to Carol and Glenn about the plan if Deanna tried to kick them out, and Maggie would try talking to her as well. Just a side note, Daryl and Aaron are out on their little mission like they were in canon as well, and Rick later expresses to Carol that he doesn't want to lie anymore, and would decide to go to Dale for advice for the first time in a while. First he's going to talk to Carl though, so that would go the same. Nicholas would be running outside the gates and Glenn would follow, leading to him being shot as he was in the original show. Cutting back, Rick now sits down with Dale, telling him that he wanted to stop the lies and just make everything work out here. The old man responded that the only way that could be possible is by adapting to Alexandria and making this place his home. He can do that and still be ready to fight at the same time. It's not a trade-off. Now Dale knows that these people aren't as ready for the outside world as they are, and he knows that it's going to come crashing down on them. However, they can help them grow and change them without aiming guns in people's faces. Rick would thank Dale for his words and would leave. Back outside, Daryl and Aaron are both stuck in a car, surrounded by walkers like in canon, but they are saved by not only Morgan, but also Gareth. They would run off, and once escaped, Daryl would see Gareth. He would get enraged and start to attack, but Morgan would back him off. He asks Gareth what happened between them, and Gareth explains. This would leave Morgan knowing the horrible things Gareth has done. He does express, however, that he regrets doing those things and has come to try and live better now. He took the threats Rick made very seriously. Daryl is just barely willing to accept this with the convincing of Aaron and Morgan would then show the map with Rick's name on it, and Daryl would tell him to follow them. However, he would be very skeptical on bringing Gareth back considering what he's done, and he knows that Rick is not going to like him showing up at all. Meanwhile, outside the walls of Alexandria, Gabriel also goes through his first walker kill as he did in the original. He leaves the gates opened, however, luckily since Noah is alive, he would notice and shut it. Glenn would now begin scrapping with Nicholas outside the gates, and we'd go back to Rick, who explains the gun stealing situation to Michonne. I think with both Michonne and Dale telling him what he's got to do, and then him thinking back to what Bob said before his death, would really push him to be better. He knows there must be some way to get through tonight without killing. And luckily, since Noah shut the gate, Rick would show up to the meeting on time. Meanwhile, Gabriel and Sasha would be having their whole argument as well, with Sasha threatening to kill him, and I think Rick would sit quiet during the discussion, so he'd allow all of his friends to vouch for him and not act crazy again. Dale would say his words last, saying his piece about how he has his faults, but he knows deep down Rick wants to be a good person. After all, he spent this whole time trying to help other people and look out for who he now deems his family. Deanna then reveals what Gabriel said about the group, while Maggie stops Sasha from killing him in another building. There wouldn't be the whole thing about the walkers getting inside the walls, but when Pete shows up and accidentally kills Reg, that's when it lines back up. Abraham takes him down, and Deanna would tell Rick to do it, and so he pulls out his gun. But then he looks up at Dale, and remembering everything he's been told, he puts the gun back. The old Rick of seasons 1 and 2 is coming back a bit, just a bit more balanced. He's strong enough to do what it takes, but he knows that he has to ride the line of morality. He says no to Deanna's request and tells Abraham to take him outside the gates. They would all follow, and when they open the gates, they see Daryl, Aaron, Morgan, and Gareth. Rick would get his gun out and aim it at Gareth, instantly remembering the things he's done. However, Morgan steps in front of him, asking him to calm down, and Rick asks Gareth if he remembers what he said would happen if he saw him again. The man then answers that he remembers and that he came here to be safe and to make things right. He knows what Rick said he would do, so he wouldn't have shown up and risked his life if he wasn't being genuine. Daryl points out that, well, he did help save them, and Aaron and Morgan would both be able to vouch for Gareth while agreeing that he did do some disgusting things. Morgan would say that it's the type of stuff that can't be forgiven, but in this world it just might have to be. Rick finally caves in, seeing as how he just spared someone, and Gareth would plead that he wants to change. Our main man Rick says that he stays outside tonight, and if he survives, maybe he'll have a chance. As both Gareth and Pete get put outside, Glenn and Nicholas show up as well and enter with everyone else. And now that the season finale is done, we're gonna get into Season 6 territory. Rick would be leading everyone in Alexandria to try to direct the herd away. I think Noah would stay behind since he had learned from Reg a good bit before he died and would try to focus on reinforcing the walls. This was what originally was planned for Noah, but of course he died, so that didn't really happen. He especially didn't want to go out again since Nicholas got Tyrese killed last time, and basically everything would go the same as with the plan, as well as most of the flashbacks with minor changes. One of those minor changes is that Gareth would be helping with the plan in order to prove himself. Moving forward, Ron, knowing that his father was outside the gates, would sneak out to go find him. He manages to do so, and Pete would be telling him about how he needs to help him get back in there so that they can all go back to normal. The two would get attacked by walkers, and Rick would save Ron from accidentally jumping off a cliff. However, Pete does so, dying. Ron becomes enraged that neither him nor Morgan tried to save his father, but Morgan couldn't have since it was a split decision by Rick. They just wouldn't have enough time. This would make Ron's hatred of Rick go up to the normal amounts as in the original, since now in his eyes, he has exiled and killed his father. Basically, the rest of the episode would play out the same, and the same goes for the next episode as well. Alexandria gets attacked by the wolves, with Morgan and Carol having their scuffle on killing. Morgan would also 5v1 the dudes he did originally, only there would be a sixth dude, and that would be Martin. Martin attacks Morgan even after his warnings, and so he gets bopped once again, leading to the rest of them dipping out of there. Morgan then imprisons Martin along with the W guy he met in the woods before, and when Carl gets tricked by the injured dude, Dale comes in and kicks him out cold. The old man then tells Ron, Carl, and Enid to go inside, but Ron doesn't listen. Other than that, not much really changes except that there would be a few less deaths. Dale would also probably save Noah from getting attacked with a well-aimed shot that hit a guy's shoulder. The episode following that would be relatively the same, though I think Gareth would go with Rick, splitting off from Glenn and the others. He would have been told by Rick to go with them, but would later dip and follow him. Once Rick gets the RV, he'd get attacked by the wolves Morgan let go, and this would ruin the RV, and so Rick would have to run home, leading to more walkers pulling up to Alexandria. There's also the fake death of Glenn and the real death of Nicholas, both of those still occur. After walkers start pulling up, Rick runs out of the RV and Gareth shows up, killing a walker and saving Rick. They would return home together, and all the walkers would be pressing against the walls. Most of that would remain, though I think Dale would be there to boost morale, and Noah would probably give Denise some more confidence. One difference is that Rick would not leave Ron on guard duty, and would ask Dale to instead, though he would teach the boy how to shoot. Sam also isn't as traumatized since he's had Dale to help him. After Dale meets Dwight, Rick would have a meeting with Carol, Dale, Michonne, and Morgan. Here they would discuss Morgan sparing the wolves and letting them go, however they wouldn't be nearly as mad since Rick was much more willing to let people live, and Dale is there too. Rick begins adding extra support to the walls, and both Tobin and Noah come to help him. Meanwhile, Glenn and Enid are on their way back home and Ron is stealing ammo. The mid-season finale would then occur, however I think it would play out a little bit differently. The tower falls over and the walkers begin pulling up through the walls. Dale would be with Rick and the others as everything devolves into chaos, and because of him being there and also helping Sam throughout the series, Sam would be much more brave, though he is still a kid. Dale would also talk to Deanna after finding out she was bitten, and she would encourage him to never change. Gareth ends up in the same building as Morgan and the others, and would see Martin and the W dude once again. Martin tells Gareth that he was going to get payback for leaving him behind, and W was just along for the ride. Gareth responds that they can change just like he did, but they would of course deny that. Morgan and Carol would have their scuffle over W and Martin, and Gareth would be trying to calm Carol down. They shouldn't fight about this now when so much is going on, but Carol tells him that he's in the same boat as them. The only reason he's here is because the others let him live for some reason. When Carol and Morgan begin boxing, Morgan would slap her, and then W would pull up and beat him. Gareth quickly gets out his gun, but Martin trips him and the two free themselves. They now take both Gareth and Denise hostage and dip at the same time Rick and the others leave the house. So the episode starts off by showing Daryl about to go up against some biker dudes before taking us back to where we were before. Rick and the others are walking through the walkers, but they would be stopped by a change of plans. Gabriel would be taking Judith to his church, and Jesse says to take Sam as well. Now, Sam is going to refuse like he did in the show, but Dale reminds him to be brave but smart. He's still young, and everyone is a lot safer if he goes with Gabriel. The boy finally agrees, and so Dale would leave with them as well. On top of this, Ron would try to convince his mother to go with Sam, but she says no as she wants to help with the plan. He eventually does manage to convince her in order to make sure that Sam is alright. The W guy, who is apparently named Owen, is with Martin, and they're trying to get Denise and Gareth outside, and they would be trying to find a way out of Alexandria. It would quickly become dark, and Rick's group was close to getting the cars that they needed for the plan. And there would be no Sam breakdown, which means that he and Jesse both survive. However, not everything is going to be as good. You see, Ron had managed to convince his mother to leave with Sam, and so now he has the ample opportunity to pull his gun out to shoot Rick. Luckily, Michonne stabbed him before he could land the shot, making it hit Carl instead. The boy collapses and Rick picks him up and runs to Denise's place, and meanwhile, W and Martin decided to cut through some walkers, and so they told Gareth and Denise to run ahead. The two wolves would quickly follow, and Denise would be about to get bitten. However, that's when Owen would save her. Because of this, he gets bitten himself, while Martin crosses the gap while pushing Gareth along as well. Denise would tell Owen that she could save him, however he needs to get her to the infirmary, but Martin had other plans. He tried to get out of there with Gareth, and so Denise and Owen were forced to leave. On their way back, Carol would shoot Owen as he saved Denise's life, showing that he had changed in the end, but of course now he's dead. Denise makes it to Carl and begins working to try and save his life, and Rick would then head out to take the walkers down, and everyone else would see this and help kill them as well. In the end, Carl gets saved, only losing his eye, Sam and Jesse are alive, and Martin escaped with Gareth. So now we're, kind of having a little bit of mystery on where they are. Anyway, the next episode would see Rick and Daryl meeting Jesus as they did originally. Now I know that Jesse is alive, but I don't think her and Rick are going to be together. Their whole dynamic has honestly been really weird and complicated, with him exiling her husband and her son trying to kill him, and of course now she has to deal with the deaths of both of them. So I think that she would decide that it's best if they don't pursue their relationship. She needs some time alone and she needs to focus on Sam, just try to get herself back in shape and all that. Rick is going to be saddened by this for a short time, but it does still give us Roshone, so I guess we're fine in that aspect. Going forward, Jesus would take part of the group to find his community. They'd look for and save Jesus' people, before then pulling up to the hilltop to trade. Here is when they would learn of the saviors, and of course the two randos would still attack, with Abraham and Rick taking them out. In the next episode, Rick would try to convince everyone that they're going to war with the saviors, and both Dale and Morgan would be against just killing them before they can do anything. Rick is a little bit more understanding of that, considering that he is a bit more of a pacifist in this timeline, and so Glenn, Noah, Maggie, Gabriel, Tara, Heath, as well as some others would also agree, so they'd basically be forced to come up with a plan that differs. Instead, their plan is going to be to pin down the saviors and force them to give up. Rick and some others would have their doubts about this plan, but they do their best. Abraham would now also drop Rosita because he likes Sasha now. So once the squad rolls out, Carol would stay behind with Maggie while the others pull up to the saviors' base. They take the first two guys out by knocking them unconscious and dragging them away. The rest of the squad then rocks up and they're ready to kill, but that wouldn't be their first instinct. They would sneak around rather than killing people who were asleep, but some dude would eventually walk out of his room and try to fight, leading to him flipping the switch. Now everyone went into straight kill mode, and even Gabriel would get his first kill like he did in the show. Once the daytime came, Rick would hear a woman on a radio, and her group would take Carol and Maggie like in the original. That whole thing would go the exact same, with Carol and Maggie eventually killing them and making it back home as well. Morgan wouldn't be locked up by Rick since he thought it was fine that Morgan didn't kill the two wolves, and plus, they didn't end up killing anyone anyway, they only just took Gareth. Following up on that, Denise would head out with Daryl and Rosita. That would get her killed by Dwight, and then Eugene and Abraham would come with the save. Carol also undergoes her whole arc where she leaves, because she doesn't want to kill anybody anymore and she doesn't want to, lose anybody as well. And so she's forced to get out by a couple of dudes on the road, and she ends up having to kill them. Going back, Maggie and Enid wouldn't have to take up watch shifts as Dale would be covering that, and so would Noah if Dale was, off doing his own thing. Rick and Morgan would pull up to find the dude who survived Carol's attack, and they would then split up, with Rick going back home, while Morgan goes after Carol. After that, the group would then head out to go get help for Maggie from the hilltop. Here, Dale would go along with, since he knew that he had to be there for Maggie, and Jesse would also tell the old man that he needs to come back safely. He had been living with Jesse and Sam for a while, so yeah, they're kind of bonding. Morgan would also save Carol and meet the people from the kingdom, taking her there as well. On the road, the group would get stopped multiple times by the saviors, so Eugene would make the plan of driving the RV to get them to think that they're all there. Dale would offer to do it instead, as he wanted to make 100% sure that Maggie made it to the hilltop. The group would thank him profusely for that, especially Rick and Glenn, who had been there with him the whole time. Unfortunately, the group would still get surrounded by the saviors and would be forced to kneel. Dale would be there along with them, and so they'd all be terrified as they were in the original. And with that, Negan would show himself and give his whole speech. When he gets near Maggie, Glenn would jump out at him and Dale would be horrified. He didn't want anyone to die, but the thought of Glenn and Maggie being dead might have been the worst for him. He'd known Glenn this whole time, and he's been the one giving him advice, and Maggie is Glenn's wife, and plus she's pregnant, so Dale would ask Negan why he was doing this, and he would respond that it's because he's the big dog, the big bear, and maybe even the lion. Nah, but seriously, he would say that he's the one on top, and that he could do whatever he pleases. He enjoyed having people to give things to him, and they were perfect for this. Plus, it's not like they're good people. I mean, they killed his men after all. Dale would tell him that Maggie was pregnant, and Negan would laugh, asking if he thought he cared at all. From there, the old man would be left speechless at this person, and so Negan would continue on deciding who would get the punishment. When Negan starts saying that he couldn't decide and begins walking around choosing at random, Dale tells him that it should be him. He's an old man, and he's ready to die if it means nobody else will. Glenn would be breaking down, and even Rick would look toward him in shock. Negan made his way back over to Dale and kneeled, leveled with the old man. He told him that it wasn't going to be him, as he thought that he was a little bit interesting. Someone who wanted to pick his brain, someone who he thought might appeal to some sort of humanity in him, someone who was ready to die, was not going to be the one to die. Dale would plead with Negan, but he would tell him no, and that if he hears him say it again, he'll kill him and a second person. Negan then chose at random, ending up on Abraham, and so, Abraham's gonna die like he did in the show, with everyone being terrified, but Dale was honestly just surprised. Surprised that someone like this could really exist. He was cheering on the brutal murder he had just committed, and worst of all, he was seemingly unstoppable. When Negan began egging on Rosita, Daryl punched him like in the original. This led to him wanting to kill another, and so he would go for Glenn next. He then swung down on Glenn and would continue beating him to death. Both Maggie and Dale would be crying along with everyone else, and once he was finished, he would go over to Rick. Rick tells Negan that he was going to kill him, and so Negan would basically take him on the same RV ride as he did originally, just bullying him with the axe and the walkers, and then they'd return. Once back, Negan would force Rick to cut off Carl's arm, or he would kill everyone there. He begins counting down, and eventually Rick would be about to do it, but Negan would stop him. He is happy that Rick looked at him so fearfully, and so he took Daryl and left, letting everyone know that they needed to go back and provide for him, and that he'll see them again soon. Maggie would be telling Rick to get ready to fight, but they all tell her that that wouldn't work. Their goal is still to get her to the hilltop so she can survive. Meanwhile, we would get the same episode with Morgan and Carol at the Kingdom, and that all ends up similarly as well. After that is the episode with Daryl at the Savior's base, and following, the remaining group returns home to Alexandria. Negan and the Saviors pull up early, leading to them all searching for the hidden guns. The main ringleader would want to see Dale, as he's still fascinated by the old man. He goes to where he's been living, which, like I said, was with Jesse and Sam. There, Negan would actually take a liking to Jesse, but of course she would resist. Dale asks what he wants, and he says that he wants to talk to him. Negan knows that he isn't going to fight or resist. It's just not in his blood. So he hopes that they can bury the hatchet. Or, the bat. As long as they work and provide and don't do anything wrong, he'd be down to have a friendly game of cards or something when he returns. He finishes by saying, "You like solitaire? Old people like solitaire." Dale refuses this and would tell him to just get the stuff he came for and leave. Negan is all fake sad about this and says that he'll come around eventually before bidding Jesse and Sam farewell. After this, we would get a moment where Sam asks Dale why they don't fight back. And Dale is a bit conflicted at first, but he responds that they can't do anything. They've got more people, more guns, so the best thing that they can do now is just comply. Jesse also thanks Dale for sticking up for her again, and he'd say that she was welcome. After that, the Saviors take most everything, and then head out afterward. The next few episodes also happen the same as well, so I'm just going to skip over them without paying too much detail. Though I do think that once Tara returns to Alexandria, Dale and Noah would share a sad moment with her, since the two have been friends for a while, and they're all mourning the loss of Glenn as well. In the mid-season finale where Negan is in Alexandria, after he kills Spencer and nearly gets shot by Rosita, he'd be pretty mad. Along with Arat shooting Olivia and Negan taking Eugene for making the bullet, I think he'd want a bit of a bigger prize. He had his eye on Jesse last time he was here, and with how much trouble he's had to endure, he's gonna take her as well. Dale and Sam would both try to stop this, and Negan decides to take Sam also. It'll be much easier to get Jesse to comply with him if he can threaten her son. At this point, Dale becomes infuriated, asking for him to take him instead, but Negan would respond, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Look, I like you, but you gotta admit, Dale, you would not make a very good wife." Once again, Dale is just, absolutely flabbergasted at how this dude was just making random jokes, and so he basically would just hug Sam, and Sam would begin to cry, and so Negan and the Saviors would dip after Rick and Aaron return. At this point, the group knows that they've got to fight back. Negan has gotten away with way too much, killed way too many. They've got to take a stand once and for all. Even Dale knows this. He goes and talks with Rick, letting him know that now is the time to put all that pacifist stuff aside. They can't afford to be docile at this point, and they have to take a stand. And so the main gang then heads to the hilltop to talk to Maggie, Sasha, and Enid, where they would find Daryl. He had escaped the Savior's base with Jesus, and now they were ready to begin preparing. So we're going to be starting off by saying that episodes 7 and 8 of season 7 go the exact same, so we'll just be skipping over them. Now after that, we're going to see Eugene adapting to his new life with the Saviors, and Negan trying to get Jesse to marry him. He basically shows her how bad her life can be normally with the Saviors, and then shows her the improvements being one of his wives can make. This does fail, but he ends up letting her know that Sam isn't going to be able to work much, so the two alone won't be able to sustain themselves. But if she marries him, he can cover her and Sam pretty easily. Of course, she's going to be reluctant, as she had been in a controlling relationship before with Pete. She never wants something like that to happen again. Now, skipping ahead some more, we would see Tara telling Noah about Oceanside instead of randomly spewing all her thoughts onto Judith. Noah tells her that she should let Rick know, as they needed to be free of the Saviors as soon as possible, and this information could be really crucial. She does so, and so the squad rolls up to Oceanside and peacefully takes their guns. Now, once again, the next couple of episodes are going to play out the same, so I think it's time we skip forward to the season finale. Dwight had pulled up to Alexandria in the last episode, and so Dale would ask him if he knew anything about how Sam and Jesse were doing. He responds that Negan was trying to get Jesse to become his new wife, and he doesn't know anything else. Dale thanks him for telling him and trusts him enough to let him help with their plan. This takes us to the point where everyone in Alexandria is ready to make their move once the Saviors arrive. However, Negan actually brings Jesse and Sam along with Sasha. Jadis and the Scavengers proceed to betray Rick and the group, and Negan would release Sasha from her casket. She had swallowed the pill like in the show, and so her walker self now attacks Negan. This gives Carl the element of surprise, and so he shoots some of the Scavengers, and the mayhem would now begin. There would be a few key differences though. Michonne would be fighting the one woman she did in canon, but Noah would actually back her up. This leads to the woman being killed much easier and Michonne taking much less injuries. We would also see Dale tackling Jadis off the balcony after she shoots Rick in the side. Dale and Rick both then have her cornered with no weapon, so she is forced to give up. But they're still stopped by the Saviors, cornering Rick, Dale, and Carl. At this point, Negan puts both Jesse and Sam onto the ground with them, and tells Rick that he isn't going to kill Carl, but he is going to show him what the grief of that would be. And this would also be punishment for Jesse making things so hard instead of just marrying him. And it would also be punishment for Dale going along with Rick's plans. So Negan now raises Lucille and aims for Sam. However, that's when the Kingdom and the Hilltop make their attack. Negan attempts to grab Jesse in the chaos, but Dale would charge at him and push him off of her. Jesse then punches Negan, and he barely manages to make it away. The Saviors then make their escape, and with that, the group has won this fight. They're no longer under the thumb of Negan. From here on, it's all-out war. So to start out Season 8, Rick and Carl would go on the supply run, and Carl would find Siddiq. In the original, Rick shot above his head to make him leave, but here Rick isn't going to do that. Remember that he is much more of a pacifist here, and so he wants to help Siddiq, offering him to bring him back to his community. He'd have to be in a cell for a while, just for safety, but over time he'd be allowed to live amongst them, assuming he obeys the rules. Siddiq accepts this, thanking the two, and they would then take him back to Alexandria, and then proceed to go through with their plan to attack the Saviors. This time, Rick isn't going to let the Savior he beats get eaten, and instead just shoots him. Like I said, he's much more merciful. The group then makes their attack on the Sanctuary before diverging and attacking other outposts. Gabriel still gets captured by Negan, so no change there. After this attack, we would see Dale going along with Rick and Daryl to loot a Savior base. Daryl splits off,
but the two would stick together, and the two being Dale and Rick. They are then attacked by a savior, and Rick manages to fend him off while Dale looks through a door. He attempts to open the door, but the savior would throw Rick off and try to stop him. Luckily, Dale dodges, and Rick manages to grab him and toss him to the ground rather than killing him. The two both aim guns at the savior, and he is forced to give up. He tells them not to go in there, as his baby is in there. They can do whatever they want to him, but not her. Dale tells him that they won't hurt her, and Rick continues by saying, "or you, as long as you cooperate." They tell him that all they want is to get the guns, and then they'll take him back to their community. He'll be stuck in a cell, but he will be able to see his daughter. The savior hesitantly agrees, knowing that he can't really do anything else, and seeing that these people aren't so bad as they're willing to spare him and, his daughter. And so Dale now binds his hands, and Rick says to come looking if he's not back soon. He then continues to a room on his own, where he would find a picture, and is then held at gunpoint by a familiar face. Morales. Morales and Rick would have their whole conversation like they do in the show before Dale then arrives, pointing his rifle at Morales' back. He tells him to drop the gun, and so, he's forced to. At that point, he turns around and they both see who each other are. Dale and Rick would learn of what happened to Morales' family, with Morales being a little bit more reasonable here. I mean, for one, he's the one with the gun aimed at him instead, and he knew Dale for a while before Rick showed up in Season 1. His whole point was that he barely knew Rick, he literally knew him for like 3 or 4 days. But here, he had known Dale for quite a while, as they'd both been part of the same group as soon as the outbreak, happened. Dale would attempt to convince Morales to rejoin their group, and he would deny, but they would then bind his hands and bring him out with Gracie and her father. After that, the two meet up with Daryl, and Dale takes the two men and the baby back to Alexandria with Aaron. Once they leave, Daryl kills Todd since he's pretty tired of sparing people. After this, Aaron then goes back to the hilltop to make sure everyone is okay and see how he could help there. But other than that, the next 2 episodes go the same. At some point, Dale talks to Gracie's father and Morales in their cells, and would bring the father his daughter. Since Gracie's father is never really named, I'm gonna continue calling him Gracie's father, and he would thank the old man, and Dale tries to convince the two that they can both join their side and live in peace after this whole thing is done. Also, instead of Carl going into the woods, he would talk to Sadiq in a closed-off room in Alexandria. This means that Carl is not going to be bitten, so he survives. Moving forward a bit, when Michonne and Rosita fight the two saviors, this is going to change a little bit. Michonne isn't wounded at all since Noah helped her previously, so she's going to beat Zaya in the sword fight. But Rosita would still shoot her anyway. Skipping ahead again, this time to the mid-season finale, the saviors are going to attack Alexandria. Now Dale wants to be the one to make the speech to distract Negan, but Carl makes it known that he's going to do it. Dale reluctantly agrees, helping everyone else escape. The old man also makes sure that Morales and Gracie's father escape before going back to help Carl. He finds Rick and Negan fighting in Rick's home and chooses to run to find Carl instead of helping Rick. He does so, bringing him to safety and meeting up with Michonne and Rick as well. The whole group escapes into the sewers and hunkers down for a while until the saviors are gone. Afterward, they go to the hilltop as in canon, but Carl isn't dead, so, that's a dub. Michonne, Rick, and Dale then head to the junkyard, saving Jadis instead of leaving her behind. Meanwhile, in the woods, Tara would attempt to kill Dwight now that Dale was gone, and so Noah would chase after her to stop her from doing that. This means that Dwight doesn't get shot in the arm, and he would then redirect the approaching saviors away from them. When they arrive at the hilltop, Morales and Gracie's father would be put into the pen with the other saviors. Maggie, Michonne, and Rosita find Georgie and the twins, but Dale implores Maggie not to rob them. They don't, and instead get the schematics to build things, and then the 3 women leave. After Rick's battle with Negan in a house, Jadis would find him and take him to the junkyard as she did in the show. She eventually lets Negan go as well. Jumping over to the fight with the Saviors versus Hilltop, we would have Dale, Carl, and Noah all there to help out. This means that when Dwight shoots an arrow at Tara to make sure he doesn't get found out as a traitor, Noah is going to jump in the way. So while it was meant for Tara's shoulder, it's going to instead hit Noah in the chest. This slowly kills him, and the Saviors are forced to retreat after a long battle. Tara, Dale, and the group now mourn the loss of Noah, and that's basically just a sad moment that fuels Tara even more to want revenge on Dwight. Rick then lets Sadiq treat his wound, as he isn't grieving much since Carl is still alive. In the night, Tobin would still turn due to being infected with the Walker Guts, and he and the other walkers would rampage. Though it is to be noted that there would be a few less walkers since there were more people to help during the battle, which leads to less people getting injured. Carl is inside helping kill the walkers, and one would attack Jesse and Sam, but luckily we saw how crazy Jesse can get, so she would be able to defend them by killing it on her own. At the same time, Dale and Tara are both on guard duty as they were both saddened over Noah's death, so they needed some time to grieve. They would hear the screams of the prisoners and would see walkers attacking them. One of those walkers would be Gracie's father. He had been hit by an infected arrow, turning and killing the other prisoners. And so Dale and Tara head down to help deal with them and try to stop some of the prisoners from escaping. Alden and the guys who followed him would stay, but the others would just run out of the gates. Dale would see Morales lagging behind and would yell his name, asking him to stay. They knew each other before, and he isn't too far gone. They can still help him come back for this. And so Morales would reluctantly turn around and return to the pen. Unfortunately, Henry is still missing, so Rick, Carol, and Morgan head out to find him. Well, Morgan's more interested in killing the Saviors because he's lost his mind again, but I digress. Carol heads back, and Daryl and Tara both talk about Dwight. Tara isn't going to be siding with them this time though, as he killed Noah. She doesn't know it was an accident, and so her anger is reignited. Dale talks to Jesse and Sam, letting them know that they're going to be okay, and that they will win this war with the Saviors. When Morgan and Rick get kidnapped by the escaped prisoners and get cut loose, they wouldn't kill them like they did in the show. Morgan does still kill Jared though, but everyone else would be brought back to the hilltop. All the remaining prisoners, including Morales and Alden, would be given normal lives in the community with people watching over them just in case. Also, now that Gracie's father is dead, Gracie would be given to Jesse and Dale to watch over for the time being. Though when Aaron and Enid return, they're hoping that Aaron would want her, since he just lost Eric, so it might be helpful to take care of a baby. Instead of Carl's letter being read to Negan by Michonne over a walkie-talkie, Carl would just say the words himself since he's alive and there is no letter. And now we're on to the season finale. Before the group rolls out for the final battle with Negan, Dale would tell Sam and Jesse goodbye, and Jesse would pull Dale in, kissing him on the cheek. Dale is a bit shocked by this, but he's down for it. This may seem a bit weird at first, as Dale is in his 60s and Jesse is in her early 30s, but honestly, it's really not that weird. They're both grown adults who've been living together and caring for Sam, so I think it's actually pretty cool. Plus, Dale in the comics was with Andrea, who was in her 20s, so I think Dale getting a young blonde is a nice reference as well, since he and Andrea had more of a familial bond in the show, so nothing like that ever happened. Anyway, both Dale and Carl would be with the group, both not wanting to kill Negan and instead wanting to spare him and make peace. Dale stops Morgan from killing the last surviving Savior, reminding him of who he was before. Morgan becomes angry at this, saying that he isn't the same, but Dale promises him that he was right in not killing. Skipping ahead to the final battle, Eugene had still tampered with the Savior's bullets, making them backfire on them. This, combined with Oceanside's people, was enough to beat the Saviors easily. A lot of them would surrender, and we would see Rick and Negan have a final battle. But this time, Carl tries to tell Negan to give up, and they still have a future, which would distract him enough to let Rick slash his throat, which I think is much better than in the original story where Rick just, talks like, oh yeah, give me 10 seconds for Carl, and then Negan just becomes emotional. Like, it's really weird. Like, I get that, he cared about Carl, but it wasn't so serious, and it seemed like he had already gotten over it. He was willing to kill everybody there, so why would he stop? Anyway, rant aside, I know this is supposed to be a what if, so I'm not supposed to, give, my opinion on everything. But yeah, so anyway, Carl would be shocked at Rick slashing his throat, but Rick would quickly tell Sadiq to save Negan as he did in the show. This makes both Dale and Carl proud, though it does still upset people like Maggie, Daryl, Carol, etc. After the battle, Rick has his final speech, letting everyone know that the communities are going to work in peace and harmony from now on. The old way is done. The new world is now. When Alden's people go back to the sanctuary, Morales would choose to stay with the group, as Dale, Carol, Daryl, Rick, and Carl were his people before, and they still are now. Because Dwight accidentally killed Noah, both Daryl and Tara would take him into the forest, but they would ultimately choose to let him leave after hearing his explanation that it was an accident. Morgan then goes to the junkyard to tell Jadis that Rick wants her to join their community, and so she would accept. Gracie is given to Aaron, who raises her as his own daughter. Dale then goes back home and hugs Sam and Jesse, saying that they won, and Jesse would kiss him on the cheek during the hug. Rick's letter to Carl at the end of the episode would be replaced by him thanking his son and Dale for being with him all this time. A year and a half has passed since the defeat of Negan and the Saviors, and by this point, Alexandria has been rebuilt, and with it, along with the kingdom, and the hilltop, and the sanctuary, they now live in peace. The group that went on the supply run in episode 1 is going to be the same, but with Carl there as well. Speaking of Carl, since he's alive, he and Enid would both be in a relationship together. The two clearly had feelings for each other throughout the show, so it would be pretty obvious this would happen. Dale would be inside his home with Jesse and Sam, and it would be revealed that Dale and Jesse had actually gotten married over this time. As for Maggie, she still would have been the leader of the hilltop, so that's pretty cool. But back to the supply run. Because Carl is there, he's going to be able to kill the walkers that attacked Ken, so he never gets bitten. And because of that, he also doesn't get kicked by the horse, so he survives. This also means that Gregory wouldn't ever convince Earl to attack Maggie, since his son is fine and he has no reason to. So I think instead, Gregory would just get Maggie alone to try to stab her, but she would notice and stop him. This leads to him still being hanged like in the show, and Earl stays a free man. When one of the saviors, Justin, takes extra water, Henry would make him drop it. This makes Justin want to attack Henry, but Morales would step in the way. The two fight briefly before Justin throws sand in his eyes, leading to Daryl jumping in and fighting like he did in the show. Rick then arrives to break it up, and things return to normal. Because of the walker trouble the group was having lately, the logs would still fall on Aaron's arm, crushing it. This forces the group to amputate the arm, forcing him to get a cool metal one like they did in the show. Justin would then be exiled later that night, and in the next episode, Rick would be back at Alexandria. He would be walking and would see Dale, Jesse, and Sam all living peacefully. Dale is just about to start his guard shift duty, and so he waves hello to Rick and makes sure that he's doing okay. Carl and Michonne greet him, and as does Judith, who calls him Grandpa. Dale tells the girl that he hopes she has a good day, and Rick explains what's up with the bridge. Basically, the rest of the episode is going to go the same though. The murder mystery ends up in Cindy getting a revenge on Arat, and Maggie and Daryl let it happen. When Daryl stops Rick from going back to Alexandria, the two get stuck in a hole, but the focus wouldn't be so much on Carl's death. This is because Carl is alive, so rather, his idea that killing people was pointless. At the end of episode 5, Carl, Dale, and the others pull up to Rick right before he blows up the bridge, leading to Jadis taking him into the helicopter. Of course, this would sadden everyone to an immeasurable degree, especially Michonne and Carl. The 6-year time skip would then happen, but before we talk about our main group, I need to tell you guys what happened to Gareth and Martin after part 6. If you remember, during the infestation of walkers in Alexandria, Gareth was taken away by Martin outside the walls. I kinda just left it at that, so now let's go ahead and follow up and see what happened to them. Martin had dragged Gareth around for a while, but he managed to escape. Martin didn't rest when he knew that he left, and so he chased him endlessly. Gareth could barely stop without seeing his shadow or hearing his footsteps, so he had to constantly run. He had been doing this for days, but one day, Martin had finally caught up to him face to face. He tried to kill Gareth for betraying him, but Gareth fought Martin off and barely knocked him unconscious with a weapon he found. But being out there for so long with nobody else to rely on and no time to get food, he was hungry. Gareth wanted to look for more, but Martin would wake up soon, as Gareth's attack wasn't really that strong. He was weak after not eating, so even if he killed Martin here and ran off to get food, he probably wouldn't make it to find any. And so he did what he knew best. He made a fire, cooked, and ate Martin's leg. This wasn't something he wanted to do, but he had to. He would have died of hunger, or Martin would have woken up and killed him. So after he had finished eating, he put Martin down with the weapon he had. Gareth would then make his way back to Alexandria, but he had been much too focused on running from Martin. So much that he hadn't even kept track of where he was going, and with walkers being a constant threat, Gareth would struggle to get back. Even after he felt like he was making some ground, he'd get attacked by walkers and would have to escape. Plus, he'd also need to find food, so this would lead to Gareth having to find places to hunt, or just find food. So basically, there's very little hope of him ever making it back to Alexandria. He kind of goes insane out in the wild alone, and he would be regressing back to his old ways. Dale had made an impact on him to be merciful and not eat people, but he's already had to break that second rule out there. The world without a group is a cruel place, and it would just keep throwing more problems Gareth's way. He would slowly become a worse person like he was back in the old days of Terminus. Years would pass, and he would just be roaming forests and empty towns trying to do whatever it takes to survive. At some point, he would stumble upon his saving grace.
the Whisperers.
Alpha and the others allow for him to join their pack, and he would be trained with herds and would be even less merciful than before. So he starts off regressing, and this is only making things worse. However, it does lead to Gareth living a happier life. So over the next couple of years, Gareth would roll with the Whisperers as one of the higher figures. This means that he would take the role of Gamma, since Mary hasn't yet earned that role. But that is just about all we can cover for him without getting into the Whisperer arc directly, so let's just go ahead and get into the Whisperer arc now. So after the 6 years, our main communities would still have contact issues like they did in the show. This time we would have Carl and Dale on the Alexandria Council trying to push Michonne to open the gates more. By the way, Carl and Enid are no longer together. This is because after his father's death, Carl became sad and had to focus on helping Alexandria, so going to the hilltop wasn't really an option. Carl would have similar talks to Negan that Gabriel does, as he wants to try and redeem him. It's interesting because in the show, Rick wanted to spare Negan because of Carl, but here, Carl needs to make sure that Negan is redeemed to make everything his father built worth it. So it's kind of a role reversal here. Because of this, Carl would not leave the door unlocked, so Negan isn't escaping. This means the whole subplot of Negan and Judith doesn't occur here. Going back to the hilltop, since Ken is alive, Earl isn't going to be injured from smithing, and would consider retiring soon. Upon hearing the news of the kingdom's current situation, both Carl and Dale want to join the fair to help them. When Tara and Earl head out with their group, Ken would go as well, which means that it's going to be less of a struggle. In episode 14, we'd get the same flashback storyline with Michonne, but Carl would be with her and Daryl, and trying to find Judith. This means he would be branded with the X on his back as well. In the present, Judith definitely wouldn't be able to sneak out of Alexandria, as either Carl or Dale would see her and stop her. This lets Michonne have her talk with Judith much earlier. Dale, Jesse, and Sam go to the festival, and Sam would quickly become friends with Henry, since they're both about the same age. Rather than Gabriel signing Ezekiel's treaty, it would be Carl, since he's basically the second leader to Alexandria after Michonne. A nice moment would also occur where Sam starts to talk and bond with Addie from the hilltop. This time, instead of only Alpha sneaking into the hilltop, Gareth would go with her. This is because he knows some of the people here, and if things get rough, he can use their weaknesses. The two would pose as a couple wearing clothes to make them look less suspicious. The two are eventually noticed by Dale, who greets them. This makes Gareth sort of freeze up, as Dale was very influential to him. So this kind of caught him off guard seeing him again. It's dark outside, so thankfully Gareth's face is harder to see for Dale. Plus, it's been about 8 years since Dale last saw him, and he doesn't look the same as he did then. Dale asks who they are, and Alpha would answer that their names are Debbie and Joseph. They're from Alexandria, but Dale replies that he doesn't know anywhere named that. But the man replies that he doesn't know anyone there named that. Alpha would begin to get a bit shaky, telling him that she doesn't go out much, to which Dale would insist that he's met everyone there. He's had a meal with all the people who live in Alexandria just to make sure they're doing well. At this point, Alpha gets defensive and decides to pull a knife, since she knew that she was going to kill people anyway. But Dale would react and hold it back briefly. Just as she was beginning to overpower him, she would be hit in the side by a rock. This came from Sam, and now that she was off guard, Dale proceeded to knock the knife out of her hand and pull out his rifle. But Alpha recovered and punched Dale, knocking the old man to the ground. She then proceeds to try and grab the knife, but Dale kicks it away before going unconscious. A fall straight to the concrete would definitely not be good for his health. I mean, he is in his 70s now. Gareth was shocked at what just happened and felt kind of bad for his old friend Dale. At this point, Sam picked up the knife, but Alpha pulled out her shotgun and aimed it at him, telling the boy to drop the knife or she'd shoot. Sam was now forced to comply, and so Alpha walked over to him, but she would hear someone running in their direction. Gareth turned around and pulled a knife to the person running toward them, causing them to stop. It was Jesse. Alpha would tell Gareth that he did a good job, and then would continue approaching Sam. Jesse tells her not to touch him, but Alpha picks up the knife and slowly creeps toward him. Seeing this, Jesse begins to fight off Gareth, and she is able to use the knife she brought to give Gareth a hard time, leaving a minor cut or two on him. But he is too strong and ends up stabbing Jesse in the stomach. She falls to the ground, saying Sam's name as she slowly dies. Gareth then began to remember Sam as the boy Dale had cared for, as he didn't recognize him due to his current age. As Alpha finally reached Sam, who is now crying, Gareth told her that they've wasted too much time. They need to get Lydia and go like they were planning to. A dead woman, a beaten old man, and a crying boy is enough to scare the people here. Alpha accepts this, reluctantly letting Sam go. But before she goes, she whispers to him,
Let this be a lesson to you, boy. The two Whisperers then go off, but Lydia doesn't want to go with Alpha. This causes Alpha and Gareth to flee, and Lydia would find Sam crying over Dale and Jesse. Lydia calls for help, and everyone would begin to check out what is going on. They get help for Dale and comfort Sam, and the old man is able to recover, but he awakes to the bad news of his wife being murdered. Sam knew who Alpha was, so he was aware that it was her, and Lydia knew the man due to him spending years with the Whisperers. It was Gareth. This name shocked Dale, and he was ruined after hearing that. He was the one who let Gareth go all those years ago, and now he's killed his wife. But that's not all. Soon after, the group would find the heads of many of their people stuck on stakes. This included Tara, Enid, Henry, the leader of the Highwaymen, and Ken's mom. All of this went on to scare our group and motivate them to do more. Dale had a strong connection to Tara after years of being in the same group. Both Dale and Sam grieved over Jesse's death, and so she would be a key factor in their motivation as well. Carl is also furious due to Tara and Enid's deaths. There's also Ken, whose mother's died, but I think he'd kind of take a back seat like his father after this. Now that Dale has seen his own limits, he and Sam will be doing their absolute best to keep their home safe. Sam is going to be sticking by Lydia's side during the next couple of months, so when the group goes out on the trip through the snow, he'd be there as well. Sam would stop Lydia from getting herself bitten by a walker, and would be trying to bond with her during this time. But after just losing Henry, it would be quite hard for Lydia to open up at all. By the way, Sam is basically 17 or 18 at this point, so if he wanted to, he could go. And Dale can't really do anything because he's old. So he'd be much more likely to die in the bad snowstorm, so he decides not to go. Lydia would break off from the group once again, and Sam would quickly follow her. Carol goes out to make sure that they're okay, and convinces Lydia to come back to the group. Eventually, they make it to the hilltop and split, with our main group going home to Alexandria. There, Judith and RJ would both hug Michonne and Carl, and the really nice snowball fight scene would still happen. It would see Lydia joining in too, with Sam also being happy to see her join the fold. Both Michonne and Carl thank Negan for saving Judith in the snowstorm, and I honestly think Dale would be thinking Negan's redemption was on its way. But at the same time, that's what he thought about Gareth, and now look what he's done. So Dale does have some doubt, and he's worried about the future. But he isn't the only one doubting this. Sam remembered that Dale spared Gareth all that time ago, and now his mother is dead because of it. He now begins to doubt Dale's ways. Season 10 would be a few months after Season 9. There would be a group at the beach of Oceanside learning how to fight, and Dale would be observing Sam's training with them. Carl is also there to help train up the younger and more inexperienced people as well. In place of Judith telling RJ the story about Rick, Carl would, as he's a good big brother to his younger siblings. When the USSR shuttle crashes, the whole group would start putting out the forest fire, with Dale, Carl, and Sam included. Dale would be working hard to put the fire out, but being in his 70s, he would quickly begin to overwork himself. Carl suggests for him to slow down, but he refuses to until the fire is put out. A walker herd would start pulling up, so the group tries to fight them. Carl tells Dale that he needs to stop once again and rest, so Dale does so, while the others kill the walkers. Dale then gets back up and continues putting the fire out right after Carl leaves. He inhales some of the fumes and begins coughing as he starts to sit down. Moving on from that, episode 2, we would see the divide between Beta and Alpha start to grow. This time it's pushed more, since Gareth, who was deemed Gamma, knew Alpha's secret, which Beta didn't. He knew that Alpha didn't actually kill Lydia like she says she did, because he was there. So Alpha and Gareth would only become closer here, which makes Beta kind of angry. Gareth listens to Beta's conversations with Alpha, where he challenges her on why she's being merciful to Francis. He would later go on to join Alpha, Beta, Mary, and Francis when they go out to herd walkers. But after the walkers hear the USSR shuttle in the sky, it unsettles them and makes them start to break rank. Francis quickly takes off her mask and tries to kill Alpha like she did in the show, but Mary is able to throw her sister off. This leads to Francis being eaten by the walkers like she was in the original. This only further goes on to support Beta's argument that sparing her was dumb. She nearly got Alpha herself killed. Back at camp, Alpha is impressed with Mary's ability to kill her own sister, so she gives her a title as the fourth in command. This means that Mary is called Delta instead of Gamma, since Gareth already is Gamma. After that, Alpha and Gareth go away from the pack to talk about Lydia, which Beta ends up finding out about. Beta would quickly get angry at her for this, but Gareth would tell him to back off. Beta makes sure that no one finds out that Lydia is alive, and so the Whisperers' plan to attack our group for crossing their border still happens. They send wave after wave of walkers hitting multiple sides. Mary would go to the group to tell them to meet Alpha, with Dale going as well. Meanwhile, Carl helps keep Alexandria secure by helping Aaron's group and defending Negan. Carl and Aaron argue over if Negan should use a crowbar or a stick to fight, but Carl wants him to use the better weapon. It'll help keep them and their community safe by going about killing walkers much faster. So Negan laughs at Aaron while he picks up the crowbar. At a certain point, Carl separates from the two, which leads to the argument they had in the show. When Carl gets back, he sees Negan let Aaron be attacked by walkers and starts charging in to help. Aaron still loses his sight for a while like he did in the show, and Carl would ask what's going on. Negan replies that Aaron was letting him fight walkers alone and brought up some personal business, so he quickly just did the same thing. Aaron clearly hates his guts, so he's not going to risk his own guts to save his. Carl takes the two to a nearby house and tries to help them settle their beef. The three are then forced to work together to kill walkers, so Aaron hates Negan a little less by the end. Anyway, most of the episode plays out like he did in the show, and I also think Dale would try to convince Carol to stop being on watch and stop popping pills, to which she would just ignore those requests. In episode 4, we see Daryl living with Michonne and her family, and we get to see their nice moments with Carl being there too. We'd also see Lydia alone in Alexandria when Sam comes to get her, inviting her to dinner with his family. Of course, now it's just him and Dale, but Lydia hasn't properly had any moments where she got to fully meet Dale yet. She agrees to go to dinner with Sam, so Dale tries to be welcoming to her, inviting her to their family. At the dinner table, Dale also holds back the urge to mess with Sam about potentially having a girlfriend, which kind of embarrasses Sam. In the morning, when the kids start bullying Lydia for her past with the Whisperers, Sam would step up and tell them to knock it off. Lydia would then walk away, and Sam would follow her. Negan approaches the two and tries to talk to them, but Sam is having none of it. He had threatened to kill both himself and his mother in the past, and he's not going to let him mess with Lydia or him. Lydia walks away again, angry at Sam, and he follows, asking what was wrong. She replies, saying that Negan was just trying to talk to them, and that Sam needs to back off. He not only got mad at Negan for talking to her, but also defended her against the kids earlier that day. She can fight her own battles and talk to whoever she wants, but she wants to know why Sam is so dead set on defending her and being angry at Negan. This is when Sam would explain everything that Negan did to him, his mother, Dale, and everyone altogether. He's angry at him for that, as he doesn't want her messing with her too. As for him defending her, he also knows what it's like to have someone suppress you like everyone does to her, so he isn't going to stand for it. After hearing this, Lydia would apologize to Sam, and he would tell her that it's alright. Lydia tells Sam that he's a good person, to which he would smile. Later that night, Gage and two goons would attack Lydia, but Sam comes in and starts fighting them off. Negan also charges in with the save like he did in the show, but this time he saves both of them and accidentally kills Margot. When the council begins deciding if Negan is guilty or not, both Sam and Lydia would be able to back Negan up, and say that he didn't do anything wrong. Lydia also would not be so shaken by the attack, since Sam was fighting off her attackers. Dale would go into Negan's cell and thank him for saving his son, and Negan would say that he was welcome. And so now Negan's like, okay, you gonna let me out of the cell? And Dale's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Anyway, Carl and Gabriel interrogate Gage and the other guy, and when they start faking their story, Carl would call them out instantly. This time, when the council votes, it's going to be open and shut for Negan to live, due to both of the witnesses, and also Carl and Dale being part of the council. Negan would still be freed by Carol, and the rest of the episode would play out the same. Though when Sam finds out Lydia's in the cell, he tries talking to her, but can't make her let herself out. In the next episode, the group would argue about whether they should go looking for Negan or not. Carl and Morales are on the side of looking for him, and Dale currently isn't there to give his opinion. He went to the infirmary as he had gotten sick, like all the other people and Rosita did in the show. The council ends up deciding on not going after Negan, but Morales heavily disagrees with this. Dale went out of his way to bring him back from the dark place he was in, so he's gonna honor that by doing the same for Negan. During this episode, we'd see Negan and that one guy who liked the Saviors survive like they do in the original, but we'd also see Morales trying to track them down and bring them back to the group. He ends up running into Negan after he's killed the dude for murdering a woman and her child. Negan asks what he wants, and Morales tells him that he had saved him by letting him join the Saviors all that time ago. So now in return, he's gotta save Negan. They would have a disagreement about if people wanted Negan to come back, where Morales would say that it doesn't matter. There are a few people who want him to return, and he's one of them. Negan eventually accepts this, and the two go back on their way. However, at night, they run into some walkers, and Negan has some fun now that he's got a bat again. But as Negan is killing the walkers, Morales would be silently stabbed by Gareth, who was wearing a Whisperer mask. Negan goes to kill the final walker, but his bat is stopped by Beta's hand. He knocks Negan to the ground, and both Beta and Gareth stand above him. Negan calls out for Morales, however he simply sees the body next to him, and that makes him realize that he is kinda screwed. The two take Negan back to the pack, and Alpha orders them to show him the ropes. While Beta would be tough on him still, Gareth wouldn't be as bad. He knows what it's like to be a newbie here, and Negan doesn't seem like a very bad guy. This is the first time they're meeting, after all, so Gareth doesn't really know about any of the stuff he did. Meanwhile, Carol and Dale are out trying to scout Alpha's herd. They end up capturing one of the Whisperers and return back home. The next episode, Carol takes Lydia out, and Sam decides to follow them since Dale wasn't watching. Carol ends up saving Aaron from Delta, and Lydia gets angry that Carol used her, so Sam makes his presence known. He tries to convince her not to leave, but Lydia refuses to listen. When Sam approaches, she smacks him with Henry's staff like she did to Carol in the show. At this point, Sam is left on the ground feeling so confused and sad, and Lydia runs away. In Alexandria, Dante and Siddiq have their chat, with Siddiq realizing who Dante is and trying to fight him. But Dante ends up getting a hold of him and tries to kill him. However, that is when Carl enters the room. He sees what's going on and draws a knife on Dante, telling him to put Siddiq down. However, Dante doubts that Carl can kill him with just a knife, so he quickly begins killing Siddiq. At that point, Carl would attempt to stab Dante, only for him to dodge and it be lodged in his shoulder. This gives Dante enough time to finish Siddiq off. The two would then start fighting, but Dante is winning until Carl takes the knife out of his shoulder and stabs it in the side of his chest. This puts Dante down for a while, allowing for Carl to free himself and kick him out cold. He would then take Dante into custody and tell everyone what's up. By the way, Carl and Siddiq have been friends, as Carl was part of the reason Siddiq even came to Alexandria. And now that Carl was a full man, they would have had a nice friendship. So that's why he's in Siddiq's house to check on him. Of course, Carl is going to be devastated that he couldn't save his friend, and would hate himself for not keeping his father's revolver. He had chosen to pass it on to Judith along with his hat, but guns and ammo have been extremely limited, so he wasn't just carrying one around anymore. When Dale finds out about Gabriel killing Dante, he would be pretty upset, but would understand and encourage Gabriel to find his way back to the light. The rest of episode 8 then happens as usual, so to start the second half of season 10, episode 9 sees some slight changes. Gareth would be in charge of patrols around the camp, and would also overhear Negan telling Alpha about how Delta might be leaking information. And Delta is Mary, by the way, because Gareth became Gamma first. Alpha then decides to send Beta and Gareth to find Delta after not seeing her where she was supposed to be. Once they've captured Delta, Dale isn't going to be cool with killing her if she doesn't convince them of the truth. And when Gabriel starts telling them about pulling teeth and cutting fingers from any whispers they find, Dale and Carl are both on a heavy no for that. They eventually just move on as it isn't really that important, and leave in their groups. When Beta begins rampaging in Alexandria, he would enter Michonne's house. Here, Carl and Judith would save Mary or Delta and protect her. Carl at first asks Judith for the gun, but would then realize that it was the best way for her to defend herself. He then pulls out a knife and readies himself to defend his brother and sister. Judith shoots at Beta through the door, and Carl would tell her, RJ, and Mary to get out of there. Mary would then be grabbed by Beta, and Carl would attempt to free her, but Beta would fight back. We then get a pretty epic battle between Beta and Carl instead of Rosita, but Beta would win, and Rosita would step in afterward. So now Mary would leave with Beta in order to stop him. Later, the two would be surrounded and Beta would flee. Moving on to episode 11, which is a masterpiece by the way, the only real change is that Ken is among the ranks preparing for the battle against the Horde. Ken would be with his father Earl, trying to get the kids out of there. Ken would then come to find that his father Earl had been bitten. The two have a sad moment together, and Ken would volunteer to put him down, to which his father would refuse. But eventually Ken would convince him to let him, and his last words would be telling his son to take care of the baby they saved, Adam, and that he loves him. Judith would then approach Ken and comfort him. Episode 12 goes the exact same, with Negan killing Alpha and giving her head to Carol. Episode 13 would have Michonne call Judith and RJ via walkie-talkie. Judith convinces her to go find Rick using the clues she had just found, and Michonne tells her to tell Carl about this and let him talk to her when they get the chance. Now that Alpha is dead, Beta would start leading the Whisperers himself. He first tries to make one of them get bitten by Alpha's walker, but Gareth would tell him to stop. Now that the leader is dead and fourth in command is with the enemy, they need to focus up. They can't be killing each other like this. Beta would turn around and tell Gareth not to challenge him and that he knows what he's doing, but Gareth isn't really that scared. He tells Beta that he's the Beta, and he is Gamma. They were given these names so that they could lead if Alpha dies, and now she's dead. The two have to work together as the last of Alpha's chosen ones.
Beta gets frustrated and lets the guy go, glaring at Gareth as he walks off. He then goes back to his old setup from before the walkers attacked, and that would play out the same as it did in the original episode. So would Negan being found by Daryl, and Carol dealing with her hallucinations of Alpha. Gareth would be at the Whisperers camp trying to rally them in order to keep themselves alive. He doesn't want to risk going to war, as it would be incredibly difficult for them to win. Plus, there's been great losses on both sides. They got bloodshed, and now it's time to move on and survive. Build up their ranks so that they can be a more formidable force in the future. It seems like most of the Whisperers like this idea, as it keeps more of them alive. Plus, Gareth is a high rank in their group, so following him would be wise. Gareth is aware of Beta's stubbornness, and isn't quite sure how to combat it just yet. He tells the group that, if it comes down to it, they may have to fight him. Beta has walked his own path and shown willingness to kill his own people. He's driven only by what Alpha wanted, which is revenge. But if they want any hope of survival, they have to leave that behind. Leave him behind. They can honor Alpha by keeping the Whisperers alive and spreading their ideology. The Whisperers seem to agree with this, but are also terrified of challenging Beta, and Gareth can tell. He ends the night off, and some Whisperers go out to keep their territory secure. This leads to them finding Negan and him becoming the new Alpha. There would be a difference though, as Gareth would have Alpha's shotgun. So instead, Negan just asks the Whisperers why he isn't armed if he's the Alpha, and they give him a knife. He then throws it at one of their heads, and Daryl helps kill the rest. The two head back and retreat with everyone else to Oceanside. Beta arrives at the Whisperer camp, and no one speaks a word of what Gareth had said that night. Beta gears them up for an assault on Hilltop, but finds that they're all gone. However, Aaron and Alden were hiding in the tower to see what the Whisperers were doing. In the original episode, Beta was very close to seeing Alden, so here, because Gareth is here, he would see him. Alden would then hide immediately and look back, seeing Gareth staring at him. Aaron and Alden think they're doomed, but Gareth puts his finger over his mouth and shakes his head. Beta prepares to leave with the herd, but Gareth stays behind the crowd. He has a handful of Whisperers who believed in what he said about Beta, and they weren't scared to follow Gareth. They hang back in the forest and intercept Aaron and Alden as they try to leave. The two men get ready for a fight, but Gareth says that he doesn't want that. He knows that he and the other Whisperers with him have done horrible things. They've killed Aaron and Alden's people, but now they see how great a toll this war has taken on them. They've all lost so many of their own, but now they have a common goal, ending the war. And the fastest way to do this is by killing Beta. Gareth can help do this, but in return, he wants no more war after this. The remaining Whisperers will move away from their land and will try not to cross paths with them again. Aaron reluctantly agrees to this deal and radios to the group at Oceanside the terms. Aaron would briefly inform them and then would hand the radio to Gareth, saying that it's for him. He would take it and say hello and would hear a familiar voice. Dale responds by saying his name. Gareth would be shocked, and Dale tells him that he always knew he could do good in the world. Gareth begins to apologize for all he's done, killing Dale's people, to which Aaron says that one of them was Dale's wife, Jessie. Gareth once again apologizes to Dale, and the old man accepts his apology, although it is a little bit reluctant. He tells him that he should probably get going, as they've got a war to end. After that, they can deal with whatever else. Gareth smiles and tells his band of Whisperers to roll out. Aaron and Alden then leave on their own. Beta and his army of Whisperers and Walkers push forward to Oceanside and attempt to take over. Because Aaron and Alden lag so far behind, they never get jumped by a group of Whisperers. Instead, they show up and save Maggie and Elijah from them. The four then get inside and help everyone as Gareth and his group arrive. They stay toward the back of the herd so that they aren't killed by our group. When Daryl and the others begin killing Beta's forces, Gareth and his squad head toward the front. They charge in, and an epic civil war between Beta and Gareth's Whisperers would happen, while Gareth storms forward to Beta himself. Negan distracts him like he does in the original, and Gareth yells out for Beta. He pulls out Alpha's shotgun and blasts him with the last bullet. Beta tanks it with some damage and tries charging toward Gareth, but Daryl comes in from behind. He uses his knife to slice Beta's sides and then stab him in the eyes like he did in the show. Negan, Gareth, and Daryl head back inside with the rest of their respective groups as Beta is eaten by the Walkers. Here, Gareth reunites with Dale and apologizes to Sam for all the pain he's caused. But once the herd clears,
Gareth takes the surviving Whisperers and bids the group farewell. He then heads off, planning on never interacting with our group again. The stuff with Lydia and Carol also plays out the same way, and I haven't mentioned it, but Eugene's trek to the Commonwealth still happens the same as well. In the next episode, Dale decides to join Maggie, Daryl, and Kelly to help find Maggie's people. During that time, he would try to talk to her about coming around on the Negan situation, but she obviously doesn't want to hear it. When the group splits up, Dale would join Daryl and Maggie, so we'd have the OGs going together. Dale notes that he's low on ammo for his rifle, but he'll try to cover them as best he can. So Maggie tries to flank the guy who's attacking, and Dale would then shoot him in his shoulder. After that, Daryl shoots an arrow at him, and he's basically forced to stop. But the guy does still blow himself up, which would hinder Dale's hearing, as he didn't have the reflexes to avoid the explosion fully. He would lose some hearing in one of his ears, but thankfully it wasn't too much to deal with. Plus, Kelly was there, and she told him that she would teach him sign if he ever started to lose more hearing. Once they find Maggie's son Herschel, it would be nice to have Dale interact with the boy, and then they would decide to all head back to Alexandria. Nothing much changes for the next few episodes, so let's go ahead and skip up to episode 19. Most of this still goes the same with Aaron and Gabriel searching for supplies. They are discovered by a man named Maze, who forces them to play Russian roulette. In the original episode, they seem to have broken through to Maze and turned him good, if you will, but right after, Gabriel kills him because he doesn't want to take any chances. However, this time, I could see Gabriel fully sparing him. Dale's influence has played a key part in this, as he is always trying to keep the group from losing their humanity. After Gabriel killed Dante, Dale talked with him about it and made him realize that it wasn't the right way to do things. Plus, they won the war with the help of Gareth, who has been a bad guy twice now. So this just shows that trusting people is the right call. They've teamed up with the saviors, cannibals, and people who wear the skins of dead people. So a guy who killed his brother's family a long time ago isn't really that far gone. And it would be even less bad when they find out that his brother is still alive, but he does still shoot himself, so that's pretty sad as well. But anyway, Maze goes with the four, and they then continue on their journey. Other than that, the last few episodes really wouldn't change. I mean, one is about Carol and Daryl doing their own thing, one's about Princess at the Commonwealth, and one's about Negan's past, so Dale and the others can't really make too many changes to that. In episode 1 of season 11, Carl would likely replace either Rosita or Jerry on their little mission, since both of them have children to take care of. For the trip to Meridian, Dale would hear how brutal the Reapers are, and know that he won't be much help if it comes down to a fight. Luckily, Carl chooses to go in his stead, with Dale staying to try and keep Alexandria together. Also going is Maze, who doesn't really have anything else to do, so he might as well be an extra hand against the Reapers. Carl tries to be the guy defending Negan from Maggie, but it just devolves into the canon argument anyway. Later on, Gage abandons the group and is found locked outside the subway with a bunch of walkers. Maggie refuses to open the door, and Alden tries to open it with Duncan stopping him. Carl is very much against letting this kid die for just one mistake, and so he charges as well, only to be pulled aside by Duncan. Alden then grabs Duncan, allowing Carl to slip out and try and open the door, but Gabriel tells him to let it go. Duncan eventually knocks Alden off of him and holds Carl away, with him being unable to stop Duncan due to his sheer size. They all watch as Gage gets devoured by the walkers, with Maze being so disheartened at seeing the man who spared him be so willing to let a kid die. This obviously being Gabriel. It kind of brings him back to his old mentality in a way. Due to Maze and Carl being there, Maggie doesn't have to put much trust into Negan by giving him a gun, since either of them could just take the gun and fight the walkers instead. Speaking of those two, after the Reaper's ambush, Maze would likely have stayed with Gabriel, while Carl would be with Agatha and Duncan. Maze doesn't really impact anything too much since all Gabriel did in episode 3 is kill a wounded Reaper, but maybe Maze does it instead since Gabriel is more mellowed out due to Dale's influence. As for Carl, he tried to save Agatha from the walkers in the woods, but there were a lot of walkers, so I'm gonna say that he'd be able to save her from being eaten, but she does still get bitten on the arm before fleeing with the others. After that, they chop Agatha's arm off and carry her along with Alden onward to the church. There, they're forced to leave Alden and Agatha behind in order to keep moving, as Agatha has lost a lot of blood due to the chop. Back at Alexandria, Aaron is less traumatized due to Gabriel not killing Maze. Ken, Sam, and Dale are also all at Alexandria, which prevents more deaths after the walkers breach the walls. On the trip to Hilltop for supplies, they don't find any rogue Whisperers since Gareth led the remaining Whisperers away. Carl tries to calm the tension between Negan and Maggie, and Gabriel, Maze, and Elijah show up at their hideout. The Reapers interrogate Frost, who tells them where to look, which causes Daryl, Leah, and Carver to end up right on our hidden heroes. However, with Maze and Carl as 2 extra people, I have a hard time believing that they'd be able to hide perfectly or slip out at the last second. So when Carl pulls the rug and reveals the hiding spot, Maze is still there trying to escape, and Carver immediately shoots him dead. This leads to a chase where Leah tells the other 3 Reapers via radio to follow the fleeing survivors. Carver, Leah, and Daryl are close to catching up on Maggie and the group, and Negan knows no one will listen to him if he says he has a plan. So instead, he just breaks off and runs a different way, causing Carl to go after him while Maggie, Elijah, and Gabriel keep going their same way. This will either force the Reapers to split up and divide their attention, or at the very least, one of the groups is guaranteed to survive if all of the Reapers go after the other. Carl chases Negan down and they hide behind a tree or rock, with Carl asking him what he's doing, to which Negan tells him that he's keeping him safe and making sure someone comes out of this alive. Carver, Leah, and Daryl pass by Negan and Carl as they continue to chase Maggie and the others. Carl wants to try and ambush the Reapers, but Negan knows Daryl is trying to keep them safe, so their best course of action is to escape so that they don't get caught by the others that might be out here. Carl disagrees, so he heads off, forcing Negan to follow him now. This causes the two to eventually get pinned down by Fish, Washington, and Powell, where Negan nearly dies saving Carl. They're able to kill one of the Reapers, but the others are too much. Luckily for them, a ton of walkers arrive randomly, and they're able to barely escape. At the same time, Gabriel, Elijah, and Maggie are caught by Leah and Carver, who aim guns at them immediately. Gabriel has a shotgun, but other than that, they're kind of at a loss in terms of weaponry. Leah tells the 3 that, realistically, they only need one of them prisoner in order to get the information they want, so there's no issue of not wanting to kill them or something. But things will be much easier if they just give up and all come quietly. Elijah obviously wants to fight since Carver is the one who killed his sister, so they end up in a shootout due to this. Daryl is forced to blow his cover here by stabbing Carver to save Elijah's life. Leah realizes that Daryl is with these people and feels completely betrayed, but she really has no way out of the situation without complying. So she drops her gun and radios to the other Reapers that Carver died and the others got away. Dixon got captured. They take Leah to a place where they can rest, and Carl and Negan eventually show up. During this time, Daryl is trying to get through to Leah since they had a relationship before, but in canon it took a lot for Leah to be convinced against Pope, and Daryl saw a lot more of Leah's ideology, which he could use against her. So since his time in the Reapers is being cut a bit short, Daryl isn't able to convince Leah much of anything. Later that night, the gang hears some rustling nearby and go into defense mode in case some Reapers are attacking. But luckily for them, a familiar face arrives. Gareth. Daryl tells him that he thought he was supposed to leave and not return, but Gareth counters that they're lucky he didn't. He saved Negan and Carl by sending some walkers in. Plus, they didn't really give him much of a head start, as this Reaper mission starts literally right after Season 10, so they pretty much just went to the same area that he went to shortly after he did. They share information, the gang catches Maggie up on how Gareth was involved in things after he returned, and Gareth learns that they're trying to acquire resources from Meridian. Well, he's got a lot of hungry people to feed now that he's leading a more civilized Whisperer group, so he'd be more than willing to help if they can give up some of the food that they get. Plus, Gareth has lost a few Whisperer scouts recently. It might have been the Reapers. Maggie agrees to this proposal and they plan their siege on Meridian. The attack is slightly different due to Daryl not being an inside man, but it also means that they have Daryl as an added guy to even do the attack. So him, Carl, and Gareth would prove to be enough of an addition to their forces to where they would at least be succeeding anyway, at first. Since Daryl and Leah aren't inside Meridian, they wouldn't cause the Hwacha to be halted, so Pope would just fire it immediately as planned. This leads to a lot of the remaining Whisperers being killed, since they'd be in the herd of walkers walking among them. Luckily, with the Whisperers filling that role, Maggie and the others are able to infiltrate the city safely. They then have to battle their way out, which should go even better for them as they have Carl and Gareth as extra people. This puts us at a similar situation to the canon one where Leah had our group locked down by a sniper, only this time it'd be Pope in her place. He'd be much less willing to listen to reason from Daryl, which is reciprocated since Daryl is less willing to make things easy. He isn't reasoning with Leah, it's Pope. It'd probably be cool to have Pope like holding one of the Whisperer masks as well, like just to show that he killed some of them personally after the Hwacha was fired, which I think would be pretty cool. And it adds more reason for Gareth to hate him. When Gabriel steals the sniper, he'd shoot one of the other Reapers since Carver is already dead, and Pope refuses to give in and has a similar line to Leah. Their friend has the rifle, but he bets they can take a couple of them down before they're all dead. Only unlike Leah, he would remain true to this, having himself and any remaining Reapers attack Daryl and his group, forcing Gabriel to shoot at them. Our group definitely has the numbers here, but Pope and the other Reapers just firing at them isn't going to be stopped easily, especially since Pope would likely begin shooting immediately after saying what he said. All the Reapers are eventually killed, but I think Pope would have been able to take out at least one person before dying. So we need to decide who it is. Now, killing someone from the canon story just feels wrong as we've got extra characters unless there's a specific reason why it would be someone else, but there's really not here. If Pope is just trying to kill people, it doesn't really matter who it is. So we have two extra characters, Gareth and Carl. Now by this point, all of Gareth's people have been killed. He took a small group from the original Whisperers, only some of them survived the final battle against Beta, some were killed by the Reapers between seasons 10 and 11, some were killed by the Huacha, and some were killed during the escape in this episode. That's just a small number getting smaller and smaller, so where I think it's safe to say that they'd all be dead. We've had Gareth's story stretch from seasons 5 and 6 to seasons 9, 10, and now 11. He is the most direct change from Dale's actions this What If story has. So to have him leave with his Whisperers after the biggest conflict in the show, only to come back, have them all die, including him, would just feel really stupid, like a waste of his happy ending. But removing happy endings isn't necessarily bad if done right. That's why if he were to survive from here, the Reapers would have claimed all of his people and left him as the sole survivor. This puts his character back with nowhere to go, and so he'd rejoin the group and help further that story. That's a lot better than just having him die right after his whole group did. So that leaves only one other option, and you cannot tell me that Carl wouldn't be a huge death for Pope and the Reapers to take. It would make everything they did seem huge as opposed to canon, where killing Alden off screen because he bled out is their biggest W. Pope just gunning down Carl would be insane. Plus, Dale's influence and interaction with Carl isn't as tangible as with Gareth, so I'm more okay with him dying. Anyway, so Pope guns down Carl, which sends Daryl, Maggie, and Negan into straight kill mode. Who gets the kill specifically isn't too important, as I think all of them are good candidates here. Oh yeah, and let's say Gareth at least gets one kill from these final Reapers as an act of justice for his people. After this, Daryl and the others carry Carl's body back to their camp, where they bury him. Maggie heads back to find Alden and Agatha both dead from their wounds. Alden died in canon and Agatha lost her arm and is bleeding out, so I don't see her living either. Negan is now in a crushed state, which he knows Maggie and the others will reciprocate now that Carl is dead. They all knew him when he was a kid, and he was one of Negan's biggest advocates. With him gone, everyone's gonna be a lot more hostile to Negan, as his presence will only remind them of how evil people can be. So he decides to take this moment and excuse himself from the group, which is another added bonus that killing Carl does. It aligns Negan's story to the canon one, whereas Carl surviving and Maggie not backstabbing Leah would mean Negan never has a reason to leave. Anyway, after Daryl returns to the camp, he tells Leah that her people wiped out another group and killed his brother's son, even after they tried to negotiate. After the group catches up to Maggie, they decide what to do with Leah. Daryl genuinely has hope for her to switch her side, but it would take a lot of work. And no one here, besides him, is really to put in that effort after finding out what kind of people she's been supporting. Daryl recognizes this fact and decides to let her go in the middle of the night. It's her best shot at living, as he doesn't know what Maggie or Gareth could be thinking right now. So Leah leaves, and Daryl tells the group what he did. They understand and head back to Alexandria. There, Gareth and Dale reunite once more, not having too much to say to each other after what they both just lost. Shortly after, Eugene returns from the Commonwealth with Lance Hornsby, and they take in all the survivors who are willing to live at the Commonwealth. However, I don't think Sam or Ken would choose to go. They're all tied heavily to their homes, as Sam's mother lived and died for Alexandria, and Ken feels the same about his father and Hilltop. As for Dale, I think he'd be willing to join up and see what the Commonwealth is about. As we've addressed in previous parts, he's getting older and that's only dragging him down as a survivor. He's losing hearing, he's slower, he isn't able to work as hard, he needs some time to rest, and I think Sam and Gareth would talk him into it, as well as Lance saying that there are definitely ways he could live longer and better within the walls of the Commonwealth. And so Dale chooses to part ways from Sam and goes with everyone else to the Commonwealth. Sam vows to keep Alexandria together in any way he can, alongside Aaron and all the others staying behind. At the Commonwealth, Dale would likely need to work a job, but I imagine he'd get some leeway due to his age. He might just go back to being a salesman like before the apocalypse. As for Gareth, I tried finding information on whatever he did before the apocalypse, but couldn't find anything. So he'd likely just have a normal job, as I'd imagine he was just a regular guy before the apocalypse. And he'd probably make the executive decision to leave out the part where he cannibalized people. I don't see episodes 10 through 16 changing much at all. Gareth and Dale can't really do much to alter the story that they're not involved in, but I will say that Leah kills Ken because he does not matter at all, so during her siege of Hilltop, Ken dies, I guess. In episodes 17 and 18, we might see Gareth and Dale be more involved in the story, with Negan arriving at the Commonwealth and helping to crack the whole case with Lance Hornsby. For the 19th episode, I think we could see Dale helping Eugene realize that he needs to go with his gut and just supporting him all the way. Eugene made an attempt to sacrifice himself by driving ahead in the RV to throw off the saviors, and Dale took on that burden for himself. If this Maxine girl is really worth so much to him, maybe this is his time. Dale would likely have been caught when Pamela sends goons to take all the group away, and so would Gareth. I could see Dale being sent to Designation 2 with Connie, and Gareth being forced to endure the work in Designation 1. It'd definitely be interesting to see him interact with Ezekiel and Negan, both people he's hardly done anything with in this story. He could easily be seen as a villain by Ezekiel in a similar light to Negan here, but they have to work together to see themselves out of the work camp. But what's even more interesting about Gareth is that Sam would likely be here. In canon, we never learn what happened to the Alexandrians who didn't go to the Commonwealth. Lance takes over and Alexandria becomes a place for prisoners, but where did all our people go? It's not like they could just take them back to the actual Commonwealth, as they would have informed everyone of what's going on. So I assume they were automatically workers for the new prison, even though we never see our group reunite with any of them. It's either that or they just murdered them all, which likely isn't the case in my opinion, given we see the list of Alexandrians who died at the end of the season, and it's only got a few new names. But it should be a lot more if they were all slaughtered. So anyway, this means that Sam would be present, and Gareth would have to see him face to face after killing his mother. The tension here would be very high, and we could get some cool interactions out of it. We kind of set up Sam going his own path away from Dale, and this already furthers it because they're separated now. In the previous parts, we've actually had Sam go a different path from Dale and trying to forge his own destiny, which is honestly kind of in line with what just happened here with Dale going to the Commonwealth and Sam staying behind at Alexandria, so maybe Sam isn't as forgiving as Dale is of Gareth for what he did to his mom. But by the end of the episode, maybe they realize that they need to work together, etc., and Sam's able to push past it, even though he doesn't forgive him. Luckily, Daryl, Maggie, and the others arrive to save them at the end. Dale, Gareth, and Sam would join up with our gang after being saved and start the uprising against Pamela. Dale helps to keep Judith safe after she's shot, and Gareth devotes himself to saving her as well, as he doesn't want Dale to lose someone close to him again. Not after what he did to Jesse, and not after what happened to Carl. Gareth lost all of his people. He won't let everyone else feel the same thing he did. So we'd see both of them take part in the finale, doing what they can to help save everyone. Rosita would still die, which is unfortunate, but Dale and everyone else would live on. I imagine that Dale could take on some sort of job like he had at Alexandria under Deanna. He wouldn't be the leader of the Commonwealth, but someone who speaks for the people and makes sure every decision trends toward being better people. And with that, we can bring the What If Dale Survived saga to a close. I know it took a super long time to get this final part out, but I'm very grateful for your patience and the fact that you are all so passionate about this series. It's nice to know that while Dale didn't make a ton of impact on the grand picture, he only made positive changes. He kept tons of characters alive longer than in canon, to varying degrees, like Carl making it from season 8 to 11, or Gareth going from season 4 all the way to the end, redeeming himself multiple times along the way. Dale found love and now has a son. It's truly a happy ending for everyone involved. I hope you guys have enjoyed the series, as I definitely enjoyed writing it. But before I go, I want to give a big shout out to all of our channel members: Kyler Fiend, Waxen Parrotfish, Ellie to Plug 2, Paul Keen, Funklocks, Hazy Brush, I Am Bored, Scintillating Susie, Roderick Hare, and Marco DeCinco. Thank you so much for choosing to support the channel, and if you want to do that and also get access to awesome perks like early uploads, priority comment replies, and exclusive community posts, feel free to become a member for only just $2.99 a month. It helps me a lot and also lets us know that you want to see more content. But as always, tell me if you liked this video, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.